wonderfully supported throughout by a great team at the Highland Council, including Duncan McKenzie, Kirsty Forster and Keith Massen. Before we get started with today's talks, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping notes to help the conference run more smoothly. Now, there are going to be plenty of opportunities later on for you to add your comments or ask questions in our workshops later today. Our Net Zero workshop will begin at 10 to 2, and our Resilient Communities workshop will begin at 3:35. You can find the links to join these workshops by going to the Highland Council main page, clicking on the Highland Climate Change Conference link in the top right-hand corner, and then scrolling down to the workshop links on that web page. This dedicated conference webpage is also the place where you can find a full agenda for today's events and also speaker bios and pictures. We will be recording today's talks and uploading the video to our Highland Council YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So if you do know anyone who wasn't able to make it along today but would have liked to attend, please encourage them to check our YouTube account shortly after we finish up today. The workshops will not be recorded, however, and just like the workshops we had yesterday, there will be a friendly and welcoming atmosphere, so I do encourage you to join us for those discussions. We are now going to move on to the first section of today's conference, which will examine what is meant by net zero and will highlight some of the actions that we can and are taking to meet our emissions reduction targets. Now, we are delighted to open this session with a keynote speech from Mhairi McCallum, who is the Minister for Environment and Land Reform. So over to you, Mhairi.
A really significant moment for Scotland as the eyes of the world turn to Glasgow as we prepare to host the UN Climate Change Conference COP26, which unbelievably is beginning in just over a week. COP26 is the world's best chance to deliver increased global action to make good on the goals of Paris and to deliver net zero in a way that is fair and is just and which leaves no one behind. As a global leader on climate action, COP26 is a great opportunity for us to highlight the world-leading action that we're taking in Scotland and to learn from our friends and neighbours around the world about how they are tackling climate change. We will do this through our themes for the summit, which are just transition and people. Those themes, to my mind, mean fairness and inclusivity. We are absolutely committed to an ambitious summit and one that engages people and communities and which works to create a positive legacy for this generation and for generations to come. The twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are, without exaggeration, the greatest long-term threats that we face. The future of our planet and, frankly, everything living on it does now depend on global action and action taken now. At COP26, we will demonstrate and we will accelerate the world-leading climate action that's already happening in our country just now, and you would be hard-pressed to find anywhere where this is more true than in the Highlands. Highland Council's Carbon Clever Declaration, for example, is a great demonstration of underpinning ambitious targets like a carbon neutral Inverness and low carbon Highlands by 2025 with a collaborative action and right across the region. I was also delighted to hear the Minister for Just Transition, my colleague Richard Lochhead, announce earlier this month that Highland Council is one of 5 local authorities taking forward a Pathfinder project as part of our Green Growth Accelerator programme. The project, proposed by Highland Council, looking at natural coastal adaptation, touches on key areas in both climate mitigation and emissions reduction and adaptation, responding to and building resilience against the aspects of climate change which are already embedded. This, I think, has real potential to deliver long-term benefits for local communities, and I very much look forward to seeing the scheme progress. But this cooperative approach, it reflects our national ambitions and actions, where we are committed to achieving net zero by 2045, but to doing so together, to walking that road together, and to leaving no one and no community behind. This action, of course, is born out of necessity and the enormous risks and difficulties of climate change, but it is also an opportunity which we will drive to deliver on our social, economic and environmental goals, and ultimately to build a greener, fairer society and world. Reaching net zero will require action in every part of our economy and society, that is for sure. And we are already taking action right across the board, in transport, in energy and in agriculture, to name just a few. And we also recently committed to spending £1.8 billion over the course of this Parliament to invest in decarbonising our homes and buildings, a move which will help to tackle fuel poverty and help to create good green jobs, as well as reduce emissions. There are multiple benefits to these actions we're taking and to the investments that we are making. And in my portfolio area, in the natural environment, we are also moving ahead. Because of course, one of the reasons that Scotland can afford to be so ambitious in our climate targets is because of the ample opportunity in our natural world to sequester carbon and to support biodiversity gain. This is illustrated in our recent climate change plan update, which committed to increase, for example, new woodland creation from our current target of 12,000 hectares annually to 18,000 hectares a year by the end of this Parliament. And to put that into context, we are already planting 80% of all new trees right across the UK here in Scotland. And this woodland creation target sits alongside our announcement of £250 million 10-year funding to restore Scotland's degraded peatlands. Again, so they can soak up carbon, support biodiversity and create good green jobs, often in rural communities. I have absolutely no doubt that rural Scotland will be central to the next generation of climate action. There is enormous opportunity in this, and we are determined that we will rise to the challenge and that our communities and our people will benefit as we do so. I know that some of these topics, as well as much more, are being discussed at your conference today, so I shall let you get onto that. But just finally, a just transition to net zero emissions will absolutely require a whole country effort, and events like this are absolutely key to driving that across Scotland. So thank you very much again for the chance to speak with you today, and I very much hope that you have an interesting and a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary McCallan.
Hello, everyone. I should like...
Oh, sorry. Technical issues on a Friday morning. Thanks to Mary McCallan for opening today's event. We will now move on to our next talk, which comes from the Highland Council's Climate Change and Energy Manager, Keith Massen. Keith is going to introduce us to the concept of net zero, which will give us an important foundation for understanding the actions we need to take to reach our targets. Over to you, Keith.
Hello, and welcome to the Net Zero section of the 2021 Climate Change Conference. I hope, like me, you were inspired by the presentations and workshops on energy and land and sea yesterday, which are of course two essential components on our regional and national journey towards net zero. The purpose of my presentation is to talk about what net zero means in high-level terms for the region. But before I kick off, my name is Keith Massen, and I'm very proud to lead on climate change and energy at the Highland Council. Fundamentally, my team's role is to support and influence positive change for the Highlands by progressing climate action, and we're doing that by striving to achieve net zero carbon emissions through a targeted reduction in energy consumption and spend across our services, and by working to increase our resilience to the changing climate. Our ambition is for Highland Council to become one of the most energy efficient and climate ready councils in Scotland. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that everyone attending this conference recognises the urgency of the climate and ecological emergency. Following the recent IPCC report, the challenge is unequivocal. The Scottish Government, as well as the Council, have already recognised this by setting extremely stretching targets, and we aim to end our collective national contribution to climate change no later than 2045. But what does that actually mean? Achieving net zero, in very basic terms, means balancing the greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere with the carbon which is removed from it, and that's a very narrow runway. The balance is achieved when the amount of carbon or methane that we add to the atmosphere is no more than the amount that we remove. To achieve net zero emissions, we first need a drastic cut in emissions from how we run our homes, how we travel, how we produce our food, and by changing the types of purchasing decisions that we make. But doing that isn't enough. There will always be some sectors, including agriculture and aviation, which are too complex or too expensive to wholly decarbonise. So to end our collective contribution to climate change, we need to improve how we use our land to enable it to absorb more carbon. In Highland, that can principally be achieved through the growing of trees, the preservation and restoration of our peat, or by improving conditions to enable our blue carbon resources to thrive. As a council, despite our corporate emissions only accounting for around 3% of the Highland total, we have a critical role not just in supporting Scottish Government targets, but also in respect of leading by example and implementing change which will improve our regional ability to reach net zero. So what are we doing? Over the past 18 months, we've taken proactive steps to combine our energy and climate change teams, recognising that unless we decarbonise our energy use, and in particular our use of gas and oil, our chances of meeting net zero are effectively nil. The merging of the teams has created a new impetus and focus for us, and we're now proactively assessing our estate to work out what exactly we need to do to bring it up to net zero standard, how much that's going to cost, and what opportunities there are to work in partnership to deliver smarter and less carbon intensive ways to deliver services to the people of Highland. One of the fundamental challenges of decarbonising a region the size of Highland is, unsurprisingly, how we all get around, which is largely in petrol or diesel powered vehicles, accounting for about a third of our total emissions. We need to change that. The Climate Change and Energy team have been responsible for some big changes in this area. Before COVID-19, we managed to reduce our corporate car travel by 1 million miles per year by changing our travel policy and deploying shared use car club vehicles at most of our key sites around the region. In addition, the team is responsible for the ever-growing network of publicly accessible EV chargers, as well as the decarbonisation of our light commercial fleet vehicles, which we aim to do by 2025. No mean feat when you consider that there are around 800 of them. The Council has also recognised that Highland is likely to play a disproportionate role in achieving net zero national emissions, not only through the sequestration potential of our land and water, but also through the generation of renewable energy, and excitingly, hydrogen, which can be used to power vehicles as well as heat our homes and places of work. Highland has all of the key ingredients for a successful and flourishing hydrogen economy, and the Council now has a dedicated officer to not only shape our corporate approach to decarbonisation through the use of hydrogen, but to support wider Highland region in benefiting from this energy transition. Speaking of energy, over the past 2 years, we've delivered multiple solar PV generation projects across our estate, significantly reducing our reliance on grid-supplied electricity, and that's thanks in large part to the largest ever award of funding to a Scottish local authority by Salix. The team's also directly supporting the Riverness Hydro Scheme, which will generate over half the annual energy consumption for our biggest consuming building, the Inverness Leisure Centre. As I mentioned before, our overall corporate footprint makes up a small proportion of Highlands' total, and it's therefore important that we work to support wider decarbonisation across the region. To that end, my team's responsible for delivering a £3.2 million programme of work to improve the efficiency of Highland homes through the Energy Efficient Scotland area-based scheme. That programme enables qualifying households to install cavity, loft and external wall insulation, solar PV and air source heat pumps, thus reducing emissions as well as an extreme fuel poverty across the region. From a carbon sequestration perspective, we're involved in a number of projects which are helping to trap carbon and keep it locked away, whilst also looking at opportunities for nature-based solutions to tackle climate change. For example, the Flow Country Peatland, which stretches across Caithness and Sutherland in the north of Scotland, is progressing towards inscription as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, whilst the Landscapes as Carbon Sinks programme is being designed to bring about systemic transformation of the land use sector to make Scotland a net carbon sink. The Highland Council, alongside our partners at Nature Scot, have appointed a project coordinator and made further time commitments from existing staff to support those programmes of work. A really important recent development for us has been the award of up to £1 million worth of funding through the Scottish Government's Green Growth Accelerator to develop a Climate Action Coastlines Pathfinder project. Our team will be undertaking research and implementation of natural coastal climate solutions, including tree planting, peatland restoration, sand dune strengthening and salt marsh restoration, to both lock away carbon but also to protect communities at risk from rising sea levels. The Climate Action Coastlines project, if successful, could unlock an additional £40 million worth of investment in nature-based solutions, so we're determined to deliver it. That's all just a very limited snapshot of what's currently happening in and around the climate agenda at the Highland Council. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more, we'll shortly be publishing our annual report on progress under the public body's climate change duties, so keep an eye on the Council website. I'll finish up this session with a very short anecdote I read online recently, but one that's resonated with me. A public sector colleague was interviewing a man in respect of climate change and asked him, "Where are we going?" To which the man replied, "Where we want to go." And that's absolutely right. We know what the solutions are in terms of getting to net zero. And yes, it's going to be hard, but it's eminently doable, especially if we work together as a collective. It's easy to moan and groan and complain and procrastinate, but the faster we take action, the better for us all, and in particular future generations. That's why this conference and COP26 are going to be so important. These events shine a light on and provide the opportunity to scrutinise what's happening, or often more importantly, what's not happening on the ground, so that we can plan our next steps in a more evidenced, coordinated and focused way. I really hope you enjoy the rest of the Highland Climate Change Conference, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible at our workshops this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Keith. Our next talk is on the emerging and very exciting topic of green finance. Nature Scot has taken the forward-looking decision to employ an environmental green finance manager, which is our next speaker, Patrick Jean-Martel, to help them navigate the growing interest in emissions offsetting, carbon credits, and much more. So over to you, Patrick.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Patrick Jean-Martel, Environmental Green Finance Manager at Nature Scot. Having spent over 12 years in the banking industry, I'm here to share my beliefs about the vital role that green finance is going to play in enabling us to reach our net zero targets. We are now all well aware that there is a need for great ambitions when it comes to delivering natural capital restoration projects. And it's true that we're facing many hurdles on our way, but it's also true that it represents a tremendous opportunity for Scotland's economy and its natural environment. And this is particularly true when talking about the Highlands, with its diverse range and often unique habitats and its worldwide renowned landscapes. better valuing the lands and the wide range of services they can provide, as long as we keep in mind the just transition principles, is essential to empower rural areas and local communities. In that respect, green finance is an enabler when it comes to connecting stakeholders to people on the ground who wants to create more value from the surrounding lands. And it's also a great lever to allow the value to flow back to even remote areas. As most of you certainly already know, the central piece of the concept of nature-based solution is to restore natural habitats to a state where it provides as many and as wide-ranging benefits as possible. So we are not only talking about carbon sequestration, but also natural flood management, water quality improvement, climatic erosion mitigation, biodiversity, and so on. As these benefits are now more recognized and understood, they have become usable tools that also provide additional benefits that investors and off-takers or buyers are also eager to claim. This all becomes a viable business model as long as projects are able to sell those nature-based solutions at a sufficient price. Green finance is the glue that allows these business models to hold together and thrive. So on one side, we have public grants and philanthropic money working to enable these restoration projects, often by providing initial capital investments. But that initial funding is often not enough or is greatly limiting the scale of works being undertaken. In addition to this initial funding, there is the possibility then to leverage private investment, with investors who are willing to commit to somewhat less secure assets or with sometimes lower levels of return, but in exchange for the right to claim their contribution to natural capital restoration projects. And this is even more relevant in the current context of low interest rates, where these additional benefits become a differentiating factor for many. So this private support can take many forms, from simple loans to equity injections or even more structured financing solutions. But we are working on ways to standardize or simplify these types of financing and make them more readily available for everyone. So this is truly an exciting time, as several Pathfinder and pilot projects that include this blended finance approach are currently being launched. They will showcase the viability of these business models arising from the selling of ecosystem services provided by natural landscapes. So, looking at peatland restoration, for example, which represent a great opportunity for the Highlands to value this amazing asset. Well, until early this summer, we only had 4 projects who had been validated through the Peatland Code. But we are now potentially expecting around 30 of these projects that are in the process of being validated. Peatland restoration is quickly becoming a priority as it allows for quick results in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions. A degraded peatland emits considerable amount of greenhouse gases. So in 2020, the Scottish Government has set a target of 250,000 hectares of peatland restored by 2030. But in previous years, we were only restoring around 5,000 or 6,000 hectares per year. So we need to quickly reach the 35,000 hectare target of restored peatland per year if we want a chance to reach these 250,000 hectares by 2030, sorry. So we are working closely with the Scottish Government to find ways to further support these restoration efforts. For example, we're currently working with them to push forward the research on the concept of a Scottish carbon fund that would be associated with a price floor guarantee that would be backed by the Scottish Government. The idea to support peatland restoration project going through the Peatland Code by providing an investment vehicle for private investors that would essentially finance upfront capital costs of approved projects. It will be able to generate profit through the sale of carbon credits, and that profit would then be shared between investors, landowners or managers, and other potential supporting structures, such as an endowment fund that would ensure the financing of long-term maintenance costs. So as I mentioned, there is also a price floor guaranteed that would provide more security for investors and project developers alike. So I believe that this type of structure would be very beneficial for the Highlands, especially for ambitious projects like the Flow Country Landscapes as Carbon Sinks project. And of course, if this is successful, we could replicate this type of structure to other ecosystem services. Another great example in the Highlands of how private investment can step in to support restoration works is the recently launched Rewilding Bond facilitated by Tridus Bank. So it was launched to build the Trees for Life Rewilding Centre project in the Dundregan estate in Glenmoriston. So the £2 million bonds were fully subscribed in less than 48 hours and allowed smaller individual investors as well as larger corporate businesses to support this initiative that will provide revenues from ecotourism and promote the local cultural heritage. Investors in the bond will receive 6% of gross interest per year over 9 years, which is not bad. But there are many more opportunities in the Highlands, whether it's through woodland or repairing woodland plantation, natural flood management or water quality schemes that can all provide valuable benefits and mitigation solutions against climate change and extreme weather events for key Scottish industries. Many more opportunities should soon arise with the development of a new set of codes in addition to the Woodland and Peatland Code. So we have the Salt Marsh Code, the Kelp Code, the Soil Code, the Hedgerow Codes that are currently being worked on. And I also feel that the Scottish marine environment could provide with additional similar opportunities, with the blue carbon appearing on the horizon, and it has great potential in terms of ecotourism. So thank you for listening and for your interest in this Highland Climate Change Conference. I really look forward to contribute to the development of these nature-based markets in the Highlands and support its wonderful people and amazing landscapes. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Patrick. Really interesting. We're now going to hear about a truly exciting project which Keith Massen mentioned, and actually Patrick Jean-Martel mentioned as well, which has recently come to the Highlands, and that is the Landscapes as Carbon Sinks project. Our two speakers today are Paul Chatterton, who is the leader of the Landscape Finance Lab of WWF, and Graham Neville, who is our area manager for Nature Scott. So over to you, Paul and Graham.
Hello, Highlands Council Climate Conference. Very good to be talking to you. My name's Paul Chatterton. I lead the Landscape Finance Lab based in Vienna, Austria. Our work is to help to structure and finance landscape programs across the planet.
Hello, I'm Graham Neville. I'm with Nature Scott and I'm the area manager for Northern Ireland and North Ireland.
And we're both going to present to you today. I'll give you a broad introduction to the world of landscape finance, and Graham will take us into the flow country in Scotland, where we're building a finance program for that landscape. Next. So there's two major changes going on in the world of conservation at the moment. One from a project-based approach to landscapes, and the other from grant-based financing to commercial and performance financing. I'll talk a little bit about both of these and how they come together. Next. Firstly, landscapes. The conservation world has been based on doing short-term projects on forestry, on nature conservation, on water, on city sustainability. These tend not to talk to each other, and they tend to have limited impact. We're now rethinking the way we do things and bringing all of these together in a landscape to achieve greater scale, to get synergies between the different projects and the different actors, so that you can create greater impact, and to be able to access larger financing. It's a really exciting set of changes that are happening across many organisations. Next slide, please. The theory of this was developed over the last decade, and I was a co-author in the Little Sustainable Landscape book that was launched by a whole range of organisations at the Paris Climate COP in 2015. When we wrote that book, we interviewed people from the agriculture sector, water, forests, oceans, many other sectors, and found that all of them have one type or other of landscape approach. Plantation landscapes, integrated catchment management, integrated coastal zone management, and so on, but they weren't talking to each other. At the base of it, though, were 5 simple steps that you could go through to build a landscape, which were common to all of the sectors. Next slide, please. And so we built the 5 elements as the basic steps in building a landscape program. You'll see that there is the second row in this diagram, and that's the core of the Little Sustainable Landscape book. But we've developed that methodology further. There was a publication we launched just two months ago, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which brings that process together with a zoning system, the 3 zones, and a focus on getting SDG impacts out of those landscapes, the 4 returns. And using that methodology, next slide, please. If you go through the process of integrated landscape management, you should get a sustainable landscape. And if we have enough sustainable landscapes on the planet, the theory is that you deliver the SDGs and the climate goals. Not so simple, but that's the process. Next slide, please. So that's landscapes, and then parallel to that is this transition from only using grant financing, which runs out quickly and you've got to go and shake the tin again, to commercial financing and carbon financing, performance financing. And here's why. Next slide, please. This is a map of money flows on the planet, about $200 trillion a year. And conservation financing at the moment comes from those 2 little red boxes down in the bottom right. Overseas aid, government expenditure, philanthropic funds, not much. There's this vast amount of commercial money that's now being channeled into conservation. Next slide. Green bonds are an example. A bond is just a collection of loans, and there was $2 billion worth of green bonds a decade ago. There's now $1 trillion, and it's growing rapidly. And it's rapidly growing the amount of money that's available for land use, for forestry, for agriculture, water, and so on. Next slide, please. And bankers are now looking for bond scale investment, $100 million plus, which is way above the standard conservation projects, or even forestry agriculture projects, water projects get sometimes at that level. So how do you build $100 million conservation programs, development programs? Next slide, please. Here's 2 examples. One on the left is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a carbon program we helped to develop in the jungles. It saves 9 million hectares of forest. That's twice the size of Switzerland. It protects the habitat of the bonobo chimp, and there's 15 different organisations that are taking actions to protect, restore, better manage forests, and bring finance into communities. They're carbon payments. On the right is a commercial investment, fully commercial investment. It's not carbon, which was put together by a French bank and Michelin Tire Company, who have a rubber plantation in this part of Sumatra in Indonesia. The aim here is to support green rubber production, wildlife-friendly rubber, and restore the forests around and protect a small area of national park. And that area of forest is one of the only places where you find tigers, orangutans, and elephants together. Very important area and a very important initiative. Next slide, please. The government of Ireland is taking this sort of approach to deal with carbon emissions from peatlands. They have 1.4 million hectares of peatlands, which contribute 5% of the annual carbon emissions from the country, largely because they're not that well managed. But with better management, they can actually help save 5 to 10% of Ireland's total emissions. So we're now working with forestry companies, the energy agency, agricultural companies, water companies, and beverage companies to put together a program that will protect this area and create finance for new businesses. Next slide, please. So that's the theory of landscape finance, and I'll hand over to Graham, who's going to give you an example from Scotland that's just happening now. Very exciting, sir.
Thank you, Paul. So let's turn the focus back into Highland and have a look at what Paul and I have been working with partners in the Flow Country Partnership to really see what investment opportunities there are for peatlands in the Flow Country. The Flow Country, as I'm sure many of us are well aware, is the area of peat in the Caithness and Sutherland counties. It's one of the largest and most intact blanket bogs in the world, and is a unique habitat providing a fantastic resource for mosses, for bird life, insect life. It's also really important as a carbon store. 400 million tonnes of carbon is estimated to be stored in the peat bogs of the Flow Country, which is twice the carbon stored in all of the UK's forests. It's such an important resource that it's being promoted as a potential future World Heritage Site, with a bid going in for inscription in 2023. Now, this landscape is an incredibly important landscape, but it can contribute a significant amount to Scotland's target to become net zero carbon neutral by 2045. So how are we going to get there? Well, the first thing that we did was we held a stakeholder workshop with a range of partners and stakeholders and community representatives last year, just at the end of the year. And we really looked at how we could get this landscape to be contributing to that net zero target, how we can attract inward investment, and what our vision was for the landscape. And the slide here shows the vision that we came out with. A multi-use landscape where healthy and restored peat bogs support globally significant biodiversity and climate protection. So it's a resilient landscape. It can withstand the pressures of climate change, and it can provide a significant source of carbon sequestration. But alongside that is the fact that we all recognise that this has to be a lively and prosperous region with high quality jobs, communities benefiting from the peatland around them, communities benefiting from the investment in the landscape here. So we're working now to try to realise some of that in engagement with different business sectors and stakeholders, trying to build the business case for investment to increase and a real step change in the amount of peatland restoration that's available and that's carried out by a whole range of different stakeholders, landowners, partners, and even crofting groups. Once we try to build that, then we need to try and attract the investment, and that's where we're going next. So the way we do this is protecting and restoring the peatlands, absolutely, but building local businesses who can have a sustainable return on this investment, have a lively landscape that's crofted, and there's rural communities thriving around the landscape, and tourism is a really important sector to this as well, looking at both the World Heritage Site and sustainable tourism, slow tourism within that. So these four pillars are the areas that were identified by the workshop as being the things we ought to increase. So it's a really fascinating and exciting time to be involved in the Flow Country. We really do welcome input and partners to join us as we try to increase and realise the opportunity that the peatlands of Caithness and Sutherland offer to us as a country.
So that's a quick introduction to landscape finance and a very practical example. We wish you all the best for your conference, and thank you from both of us.
Thanks very much for that, Paul and Graham. Our next talk is going to move the discussion in a slightly different direction. So moving away a little bit from green finance and carbon sequestration and carbon storage. And we're now going to consider how our homes and the built environment are designed and what impact this has on energy use and emissions. Philip Shannon is a design consultancy manager with the Highland Council and is going to take us through the Passive House project. So over to you, Philip. Okay, we're just waiting for the video to kick in. I think there's just a slight delay, but I'm sure the video will be there soon. There we are, off we go.
Property service. My role in this team is to manage the architectural, mechanical and electrical engineering and other building consultant teams to enable the successful delivery of capital funded projects for the Highland Council. We work on a wide range of projects for various Highland Council clients, from small domestic build projects to major educational facilities. In recognition of the climate crisis, the Housing and Property Service are working towards delivery of low to zero carbon buildings across their portfolio. This begins at the briefing stage of the project, and we are working with clients to develop technical briefing documents which align with the ambitious low to zero carbon building targets. In some instances, there is a financial support for this. For example, the Scottish Government is providing additional funding through its Learning Estates Improvement Programme, which will allow us to develop our first passive house buildings. We are, however, looking to consistently take this passive house approach through a number of our educational projects. Some of these projects include the Tain 3 to 18 campus, which is likely to be our first passive house building, Nairn Academy and Bewley Primary School. We are also developing two new passive house primary school projects in Skye. They are Dunvegan Primary School and Broadford Primary School. I would like to introduce you to our colleague Ewan Lockhead. Ewan is an architect in the design consultancy team and an accredited passive house designer, and he is now going to tell you a little bit more about Passive House.
Hi, I'm Ewan Lockhead, architect and passive house designer at Highland Council. Passive House is an independent building energy and certification process which uses a fabric first approach. This means that heat loss through the building fabric is reduced to a minimum while ensuring great thermal comfort and exceptional indoor air quality. To achieve this requires high levels of insulation, triple glazed windows, best in class air tightness, a heat recovering mechanical ventilation system, and highly efficient electrical equipment. To ensure that the energy savings from this approach are realised, an expert passive house certifier is engaged throughout the process to ensure that the construction is built exactly as designed. Achieving the passive house standard in these school projects will have multiple benefits. As well as ensuring a greatly improved, healthy and inspiring learning environment, it will also reduce energy demand by up to 90% and ensure compatibility with renewable technologies such as air source heat pumps. If rolled out at scale, this will not only save money in running costs, it will also ensure that we can move away from fossil fuels of the past and utilise modern, clean, renewable energy such as wind, wave and solar to meet the majority of our energy needs in the future. While we are only at the beginning of the transition to net zero, it is hoped that these projects will clear a path towards reducing carbon emissions from operational energy across the Highland Council estate.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Philip. Our next talk is on a new sustainability toolkit, which the Highland Council has been using for just under a year to reduce waste, lower emissions, and raise awareness of environmental projects and environmental actions. Sonia Perez is the Scotland Project Manager for Students Organising for Sustainability which is a charity that sits within the National Union for Students and delivers this toolkit, and she'll be our speaker today. Over to you, Sonia.
Hi everyone, my name is Sonia Perez and I am the Scotland Project Manager at Students Organising for Sustainability UK, or SOS UK. And today I'm going to be talking about one of the programmes that we deliver. It's called Green Impact, and I'm going to introduce it in a moment. But yeah, we're going to talk about how Green Impact can be a sustainable project platform for organisations and communities. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be able to discuss all of this with you. So it's going to be a really brief session, just around 10 minutes. I'm going to start by introducing SOS UK, then I'm going to talk about a behavioural change theory, and then talk about Green Impact and how Green Impact works with this behaviour change theory to take climate action and to encourage individuals to take climate action and progress sustainability. So SOS UK, Students Organising for Sustainability, is an educational charity, and we believe that education is formative in creating a more just and sustainable future. So we really focus on sustainability and supporting individuals to be able to take action. And so we were developed by students and staff from the National Union of Students, essentially to go further and faster with crucial and transformational sustainability work. And so in terms of behavioural change, I'll just briefly introduce this idea, but we're absolutely in a climate crisis, and the impacts are being felt in Scotland and in the UK and across the world. And we really do need to make behavioural change. We need to make changes in our behaviour. We need to make changes in our lives. We need systems and institutions to make changes. And how do we do that? Well, just introducing briefly, and then I'll discuss how Green Impact fits in. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA's behaviour change theory, which is the 4 E's. So essentially the 4 E's are enable, encourage, engage, and exemplify. So enable, a way to sort of enact behaviour change is to make behaviour change easier for people, provide people with the support they need to be able to make different choices, more responsible choices, understand people's capacity or people's circumstances and support them to work around their circumstances. Then there's encourage. So we are in a climate emergency, we're in a climate crisis. It can be difficult to be optimistic, but it's really important to remain positive and to be supportive of individuals attempting to make a change. And one way we can do this is by highlighting the benefits of making that change. So speaking about the benefits of living in a more sustainable world where everyone is healthy and happy and able to thrive. So really framing things positively, encouraging individuals. There's engaging, so getting more people involved by helping them develop a sense of personal responsibility. And so this is about really speaking to individuals' interests and what drives them, their priorities and their needs, and showing them how sustainability and it is relevant, and in that way supporting them to make changes. And then lastly, exemplifying. So celebrating. So it's kind of in line with encouraging, but being optimistic and celebrating successes, shouting about how behavior change has been made essentially, and the amazing progress that we're making to climate action. So now I'm going to introduce Green Impact, and then towards the end I'm going to talk about how Green Impact uses those 4 E's to support organizations to progress sustainability. So what is Green Impact? So Green Impact is a multiple award-winning program which is designed to support environmentally and socially sustainable practice within organizations. And so this can really mean anything. It's a broad range of actions, from recycling to more systems change thinking, to well-being campaigns, sustainable transport, growing food at home, growing food on the grounds of your organization. There's a really broad range of actions that can be included in Green Impact. And so in this way, it really speaks to many people. And Green Impact is all about building a community of people to work together on sustainability. And it's really about encouraging that community building and giving back to local community. And so Green Impact involves 4 different areas. Essentially, there's teams that work together within an organization, and these teams are sort of motivating one another in a competitive, but it doesn't have to be competitive type way. There's a bespoke toolkit that each organization has that the teams work off of. There's monitoring, so students lead audits at the end of the cycle where they look at the toolkits and the actions that have been completed by teams. And then there's awards. There's celebrating how teams have been able to complete their toolkit. And I'll explain these actions in a bit more detail in a moment. But before I do that, I'd just like to talk about the reach that Green Impact has. So Green Impact is currently delivered in 6 countries globally. It has engaged over 200,000 people in sustainability and social justice issues. It's been used by over 1,100 organizations, ranging from student unions to hospitals to councils, as we are working with the Highland Council at the moment. 6,000 students have been provided with training and development opportunities through Green Impact, especially as our audits are student-led. Excitingly, over 400,000 actions have been completed, with 260,000 of these actions as a direct result of Green Impact. So that's that's 260,000 actions that have, contributed to sustainability. And so participants of Green Impact view sustainability very positively. 72% say when they take part in Green Impact, they know more about how to use their knowledge to make changes in their daily lives. 81% of volunteer student auditors feel the experience has positively enhanced their employability because they're able to develop really important skills when they audit their teams. And 100% of lead contacts at organizations who take part in Green Impact report that they've seen positive changes in sustainable behaviors amongst staff. The power of the network. So what's amazing about Green Impact is that it's a collective effort. When an organization takes place, they're not just sort of in isolation trying to progress sustainability at their organization. They're a part of a group of hundreds of organizations that are sort of working to progress sustainability. And so we do connect organizations in this sense to share good practice, to reduce duplication, and to avoid reinventing the wheel. And we do this by, using social media, maintaining an online resource hub. We deliver national webinars and events. And even within your organization, there's just so much support, including, support calls and coffee mornings and bespoke webinars as well. So it's really about building relationships, which I've said, and about community building at the local, at the national, and also, if you'd like, at the international level as well. And so Green Impact participants include, but aren't limited to, the University of Cambridge, the University of Western Australia. As I mentioned, we're working with the Highland Council and schools within the Highland Council, and University of Dundee, and many more. So it's a broad range of organizations and institutions that take part. And I talked about the 4 sort of areas of Green Impact. And so this is a bit of expanding on that, just so you can understand a bit more. So Green Impact follows a 6-step approach, which can be adapted to, suit the needs and the circumstances of organizations. The first step is planning the toolkit. So the toolkit for every organization is bespoke to that organization. Then there's team recruitment. So within an organization, the teams might be, people that work together, might be departments. In the Highland Council for schools, each school is a team. Then there's that ongoing support, so newsletters, coffee mornings, bespoke webinars. Then, so essentially teams are completing their toolkit, and in the toolkit, there's actions that are correlated to a score. And so they complete their toolkit, they have an idea of what they might score. Students from the University of the Highlands and Islands, in this case, for Highland Council, come in and audit the teams and decide on what their end score will be. And the end score correlates to an award. So they might get a bronze award or a silver award or a gold Green Impact award. And we celebrate that. And then it starts again with a feedback. We want to understand how teams felt about the process, and then evaluation. And And then we sort of take the toolkit and look at it again and try and make sure it's still relevant and still beneficial depending on the organization's new circumstances. And I think what's so great about Green Impact is that it's not about, completing all of the actions and getting a gold award in the first year. It's really focused on progress and seeing sustainability not as a means to an end, but a journey and a process that needs to be embedded in every single organization and every single institution. As I mentioned, each organization has their own bespoke toolkit. There's a range of actions that cover, waste and finance and travel and health and well-being, and for schools, it's curriculum and learning for sustainability. Each action has a number of points that the team can score. And within the toolkit, there's also some really interesting bits. All of the actions are linked and mapped against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so this is for staff and people, who are involved to be able to see that their actions aren't just benefiting themselves at the local level, but again, it's a collective pursuit. You're contributing to global climate action. There's also now criteria for flexible working. I know with the Highland Council, a lot of work has now been moved to remote. I know the Highland Council is a really big area, so there is a lot of remote working regardless. And so our toolkits have flexible working. They have actions that can be done from home, that should be done from home, and they have actions that can be adapted as well to be done at home. So it is completely possible and actually amazing to see teams and organizations doing this from home, because it's just such an adaptable program that's able to sort of work with any kind of situation. And back to those 4 E's. So DEFRA's 4 E's, which were, enable, exemplify, engage, encourage. How does that relate to Green Impact, and how does Green Impact work with these 4 E's to take action in the climate crisis and to progress sustainability? So the first one, enable. Green Impact gives organizations and individuals and their teams the tools and the knowledge through our ongoing support to make a change. So we're providing doable, realistic actions that are, interesting because they're so varied, can be interesting to anyone, and we're providing the support to be able to complete those actions. Exemplify. The program showcases what others have done through our webinars, through case studies. We're asking people to lead workshops if they feel like it, or webinars, to show what they've learned. It's that collective learning and that, collective pursuit that I've been talking about. Encourage. So because all of the cycles of Green Impact end with an audit and then end with giving awards, we're really recognizing the effort that teams have been putting into Green Impact. It's something that everyone can be really proud of, and a badge of honor for them. And then engage. So through our support and through our workshops, we're engaging communities, we're engaging organizations and teams that are involved, and giving them resources to be able to take action. And I think, as I mentioned before as well, Green Impact, the actions that are in the toolkits are so varied because sustainability is so broad and so interconnected. So there's really something for everyone. If you're interested in travel, for example, you can, be that person in your team to focus on travel. If you're interested in, water, you can be that person that focuses on reducing water waste or thinking about, the carbon emissions used to heat water. There's really something for everyone. You can focus on the scientific or on the more social side of things. So that's Green Impact, and that's how Green Impact uses behavior change theory, particularly the 4 E's, to support communities and organizations to make a change and to progress sustainability. And so thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And if you have any questions, please do get in touch. We're always here to have a conversation about how Green Impact might be a good program for you to be able to make sustainable changes at your organization. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sonia. Our next talk comes from Audrey McIver, who is the Director of Energy Transitions and Net Zero for Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Audrey will be talking about their work on investing in emerging technologies. So over to you, Audrey.
change, today's conference is a great example of how we can pull together, start or continue conversations, take steps, big or small, and really contribute to Scotland ceasing its own contribution to climate change by 2045. For the Highlands and Islands, there is the opportunity to become an exemplar region in the transition to a net zero economy through the continuing development of a world-class renewable energy industry and in developing our rich natural capital. We can achieve this by using our people, our knowledge, wealth of natural resources, technology and infrastructure for the economic and social benefit of the Highlands and Islands. COP26 is just over a week away, and there is a real hope that it inspires worldwide action and commitment. At Highlands and Islands Enterprise, it has already inspired action. Our new Net Zero section on the HIE website is a rich source of information on what you can do to start on the journey to net zero. And we will continue to add more information on what is happening across the region to help us all embark on this transition. There you will also meet some of our net zero heroes who I'm confident will inspire action, whether that be in energy innovation, waste management, food production, or welcoming visitors sustainably. And with COP26 being in Glasgow, it will provide a greater opportunity to showcase Scotland's ambition to reach net zero to the rest of the world. There is no doubt that the Highlands and Islands will play a leading role in the transition. It is already punching above its weight. Through HIE-led investment and working with Scottish and UK governments, the region is world-leading in marine energy. We have innovative technology developers demonstrating new energy concepts in our waters at the European Marine Energy Centre in Orkney, world's first tidal energy arrays off Shetland and Caithness coasts, and an experienced supply chain which has evolved to support this emerging sector. And all of this has long attracted international attention. The potential is particularly exciting, not only in the prospect of attracting new high-value jobs and skills in our remote and rural areas, but also for it to be a major contributor to net zero plans in marine nations across the globe. A huge part of reaching net zero will be in large-scale renewable deployment, and Crown Estate Scotland's current offshore wind leasing round alone, which is set to more than double planned and operational wind farms in Scotland, clearly illustrates just how much of this we can expect around our shores. When we consider the positive impact of the Beatrice offshore wind farm's operation and maintenance base at Wick and potential for replication in other parts of our region, there is much to be excited about. And the dynamic, resilient businesses, so typical of the Highlands and Islands, have already done so much to prepare for the energy revolution, not least our many ports now servicing the sector. These strategic opportunities, now with scope for further expansion into hydrogen production, which could be economically transformational, are only part of the transition to net zero. Our natural habitats and landscapes, land and marine based, offer scope for carbon sequestration, an alternative to those hard to treat industries. We are keen to engage with communities in ensuring that investments are more widely and equitably felt. How we heat our homes and businesses, how we travel, our food consumption habits and how we minimise our waste will all need to change. The necessary disruption will be hugely challenging and in some cases potentially quite daunting, but we can't afford to stand still. Working together as Team Highlands and Islands, using the tools and tactics available on HIE's website and those of our many partners, we can be that exemplar region in the fair and just transition to net zero.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Audrey. Our next talk features a conversation with Nathan Chaplin, who is an engineer with the Highland Council, and will be talking about the important role that net zero buildings can play in decarbonising the Highland Council's estate. Over to you, Nathan.
So hello to Nathan. My name's Katie Andrews. I am one of the climate change coordinators at the Highland Council, and today I will be speaking with Nathan Chaplin, who is one of our engineers within the climate change and energy team. Nathan, do you want to give a little introduction and sort of describe your role in the team and any key projects you're involved in currently?
Sure, no worries, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so I am an energy engineer within the climate change and energy team at the Highland Council, and I guess my primary role in the kind of climate change and energy sort of crisis at the moment is looking at our kind of how we adapt our buildings and push them forward to kind of meet the net zero ambitions that obviously Scottish Government have, but also the council are taking on board internally. So that's one of the key projects that I'm working on, I guess. One of the sort of topics you're wanting to talk about today.
Perfect. Yeah, so I suppose obviously people will understand the targets that have been set by Scottish Government, the 2045 targets, and then within Highlands we've got very ambitious targets ourselves, sort of reaching that net zero Inverness and a low carbon Highland region by 2025. So could you give us a little outline of what does a net zero building actually look like?
Sure, no worries. So a net zero building will take very, very different forms depending on what the building use is, where the location is, and they're going to really drive how we can kind of achieve that net zero. But ultimately, the main thing behind the kind of net zero building is that we need to minimise the building energy use first of all, first and primary. The port of call is to kind of reduce that and minimise that as much as we can. And then we want to try and maximise any sort of potential for on-site generation. So whether that's, wind turbines, PVs, that sort of thing for electrical generation. And obviously we need to try and get rid of any sort of fossil fuels that are potentially heating our buildings as well. So that's the main things that we need to look at, and that's how a net zero building will kind of be framed. So it really does depend on the form, the function of the building, because different opportunities will arise depending on what the building is and where it is, but ultimately reduce the energy use that we've got on site and then maximise any sort of generation that we can, and that's kind of how we'll meet the kind of or make a net zero building.
Brilliant. No, that's really interesting. But why do you feel like we need to adapt our buildings with the changing climate and other factors? What are the main driving forces behind this?
I guess the key thing within the Highland Council itself, the building stock is heavily responsible for the kind of carbon footprint that the council has, and it's actually almost 70% of our footprint is actually driven by our energy use across our building estate. So obviously from the council's point of view, we need to drive that down. If we can't do that, then it's obviously there's very little chance that we're going to meet the net zero ambition. So that's why kind of adapting and changing our buildings and developing and also new buildings as well, making sure they adhere to the kind of net zero ambition. But if we don't adapt our buildings, then yeah, basically there's no chance of us meeting the net zero targets. So that's why it's very key to kind of tackle this area across the business.
Yeah, it's quite a stark statistic, isn't it? 70%.
I know, it's wild when you look at it. It's actually, yeah, it's such a big proportion of what we've got.
Absolutely. So it's really important to sort of put that on people's radar. So how are the Highland Council tackling net zero ambitions currently within our non-domestic estate? And could you possibly differentiate between the non-domestic and what a domestic household will be for people that might not understand?
Yeah, sure. So non-domestic. So I'll start with that first. But the non-domestic and domestic. Obviously, domestic is kind of houses, people living in them, whether it's kind of owned by the council or privately owned. That's kind of where the domestic side of things is. Our non-domestic estate can range from the likes of schools, more commercial things like schools, your depots, libraries, museums, those sort of things, all kind of fall into the non-domestic category. I guess within the Highland Council ourselves, a lot of that non-domestic estate is our school estate. So that's kind of one of the highest users. If you were to combine them all into one category, the schools is one of our biggest users. But from how we're going to tackle that within the council, we are trying to take a kind of strategic approach on that. And obviously, when you look across our whole estate, which is huge, we've got over kind of 1,200 non-domestic. That's not including the houses that the council have as well. that there's such a wide range, and you have some that are performing well, some that are performing poorly. And obviously we need to, from a net zero point of view, we need to take a strategic approach on, right, how do we tackle such, so many buildings? We have to take a strategic approach on, right, this is the ones we're going to tackle. And the way that we're doing that is kind of looking to kind of benchmark our buildings against kind of, there's benchmarks out there that we can use to compare different types of buildings on how they're performing. And essentially that's based on a kind of kilowatt hours per meter squared basis. So at the moment, we've kind of categorized all our buildings into what type they are, then benchmarked them to see how they're performing. And then that gives us the ability to be able to kind of go, right, let's be a bit strategic about this. How can we tackle these buildings? What do we need to do? And then we can start to kind of establish the parameters that we might do to try and meet a kind of net zero ambition sort of level of energy use per building. And that's really the starting point of it. And then we need to kind of start to categorize our buildings in kind of area geographically and stuff like that, because obviously the council has such a wide geographical location that we need to start sort of almost building a portfolio of what projects we can do and the measures that we need to do. And it's going to be, it's obviously a really difficult task because there is so many buildings, but if we can take that strategic approach and then look at it from what do we need to do to the buildings, and most of our buildings, because we do have a kind of an older estate, we are going to have to take this kind of holistic approach on how to improve the building. So the key thing is kind of fabric first. I mean, it's always talked about, but if we don't improve the fabric, then our heating is always going to be the same kilowatt hours. Yes, we could transition from potentially a fossil fuel to electrified, and then the decarbonisation of the electric grid would obviously reduce our CO2 footprint. But ultimately, we need to reduce that kind of heating load to the building, because that's the way that we can actually meet the net zero ambitions.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. And you hear this this word tossed around in the news quite a lot when people are sort of talking about decarbonisation of buildings, the retrofitting. Could you explain that for people that might not be aware of that term?
Yes, so retrofit is essentially, it's classified against anything that's kind of an existing building. So it could be a house, it could be a non-domestic, it could be a school, it could be a house or that sort of thing. But essentially what it is retrospectively going back into that building and going, right, how can we improve this? What can we do to the likes of the heating system that's in there potentially? Let's if we've got an oil boiler, for instance, we need to get rid of that. What's the kind of the insulation? What's the fabric of the building? How are the windows? How are the walls? How are the roof? Is there improvements that you can make on that to obviously improve the efficiency of that building? And then there's other things that start to come into effect, because if you improve the fabric and you improve the air tightness of a building, essentially then you have less air coming into the building, and you need to then start thinking about, okay, let's bring some additional ventilation in there, because CO2 levels would build up and you've not got that fresh air coming in unless you've got windows open, but then you're losing your heat. So you need to make that balance. So in retrospective, retrofit is essentially going back to a building and going, how can we make this more efficient? What steps do we need to do to make it as efficient as possible?
Brilliant. That's really helpful, Nathan. Thank you. And just finally, sort of touched on some of those challenges, especially in Highlands, due to our geographic location and our remote and rural geography. What do you see as sort of the main challenges in Highlands for achieving net zero buildings? And can you see the opportunities as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, one of the key things, which I did touch on, is the geographical sort of Highlands is so wide and so diverse that we're going to have different, different solutions for different locations, because it's not a one shoe fits all. Unfortunately, we're not a city where we can kind of just, it can be a bit more sort of logical in that respect. We have to think a little bit out of the box, because we have things like constriction of the electricity grid. So it might, there might actually be scenarios where we can't look to electrify the heat because the constriction of the grid, or the potential for upgrading the electricity to that building might be kind of financially, just not feasible. So that's kind of the challenges that we are going to have. We're going to have to look at from, geographical and it isn't going to be a one size fits all sort of thing. We're going to have to take it site by site and make assessments on that. Other challenges are obviously our estate that we have. A lot of our school buildings, for instance, I touched on before, is quite a large proportion of our non-domestic estate. It's quite an old estate. Some of them, are listed buildings and that sort of thing, for instance. So tackling an older building is always going to be more challenging. And they've got, the chances of having poor fabric and poor building performance is higher on an older building, just because the building regs when it was built back in the day maybe weren't as strict as they are now, and you don't have those kind of those things to start on and build on top of. And also it provides the other thing where there's limited data on what the building's actually, how it was built, what the U values, and U values are kind of the construction of your building, and what the performance of that is thermally. So if you don't have those sort of details, you kind of have to make assumptions or do surveys to kind of further understand what's going on with those. So the limited data that we have available on our aging estate is also a kind of challenge that we have to overcome. And there is ways and means of doing that, obviously by doing surveys or deploying sensors to capture information, whether it's temperature, CO2 levels and that sort of thing within a building. We can then get a better flavour of how the building's actually performing, and we can do that before and after kind of a retrofit as well to get a better understanding. So there's real opportunity there to kind of develop and get a better understanding of how our buildings are performing. Other things is obviously we're talking about all these different measures we need to do to a building to get it to net zero, but it's not free. So we're going to have to pay for that in some way. So the cost of improving all these buildings, it's not going to be cheap. So we need to find a way to be able to kind of finance that. And we need to find a kind of, we're not going to be able to do the perfect solution for every sort of building. We need to find that kind of balance point. And that's a real challenge, because you want to improve different aspects of the building to get to this net zero ambition, but you need to find that balance point, because you could spend millions and millions of pounds on one building to get it to true net zero. However, is that best, money best spent? No, because you could do, 6 or 7 buildings potentially at kind of 80-90% rather than getting the 100%. So that's, finding that balance point is going to be a real challenge, but also again provides an opportunity to kind of try and develop and test different solutions across different areas. So other challenges, like I guess because we're kind of talking about, I've talked about schools quite a lot, but I guess it applies to all the non-domestic estate. It's kind of the disruption that these sort of changes in the retrofit might actually have on the people that are within the buildings. Taking a school again as an example, if we were to improve the fabric, is it a case that we're going to have to decant the school? And then you have to look at, when you timetable that in with the kind of school agenda, as well as kind of, do you have to have porta cabins for the temporary sort of classes and that sort of thing, depending on how intrusive the kind of changes are. If it's a plant, boiler change or that sort of thing, you have to factor that in. Do you do it in the summer months when you're not going to need that heating as much? But obviously we then have so many buildings that we're trying to tackle. That's not always going to be the case. So trying to timetable all in is going to be key. I've talked about, I guess, the size and the number of buildings that we have. That's another thing we're going to have to look at seriously, how many buildings we have and whether there's a bit of asset rationalization within there, so that we can, look to kind of minimize the amount of buildings that we have. Might help in achieving the net zero ambition as well. And then realistically, when we do these improvements, we're not going to, there's not going to be a zero, we're not going to get to a level of zero across, especially our existing estate. So there's going to be that challenge that we need to then kind of look at kind of offsetting in an additional generation to offset that remaining sort of carbon footprint that we're going to have after we've even done all these changes. So that's a real challenge as well. We're going to have to get an understanding of what that means and how we can overcome that.
Yeah, lots of challenges, isn't it? And it's that financing net zero, isn't it? So it's going to come from sort of legislation and different funding packages that will come from the government. So Definitely lots of opportunities, and you sort of touched on it in one of the questions, sort of taking that holistic approach and using that partnership approach to the different projects around the estate. So it's really good, and it's very, very timely, especially what's been going on with sort of the energy crisis. And I think that it really just does strengthen that argument for net zero buildings and retrofitting our buildings, as you say. So I don't know if you had any sort of closing points, or you've been very helpful.
Yeah, no, I guess the one thing I was conscious there, maybe the opportunities within the Highland area are huge. You know, the chances of wind generation, that sort of thing. There's a lot of opportunities for other, you know, ideas, and because we do have such a ranging geographical kind of area, there is opportunities there. It's not like we don't have the land mass, let's call it, for other things to happen. So there is opportunities within there, even though there is challenges with the geographical area. So yeah, it's a very it's very interesting to be involved in it all, and there's so many different possible solutions within the Highland Councils that we're going to have to adapt to depending on where we're looking to kind of reduce and produce net zero buildings. So very exciting times.
Yeah, very exciting indeed. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for a good conversation about decarbonising our buildings. If you want to find out any more, just get in touch with the Climate Change and Energy team. And thank you again, Nathan, for joining me today.
Oh, no worries. Thanks a lot, Katie.
Thanks.
Have a nice day. Cheerio.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Nathan. Our final talk for this section today comes from Katie Andrews, Climate Change Coordinator and co-organiser of today's event. After this video, we're going to go to a tea break, and then we'll move on to our Resilient Communities section after the tea break. Katie's going to give an overview of what a just transition truly means and why it is important to achieve this for Highland. So over to you, Katie.
Hello. For those who haven't met me yet, my name is Katie Andrews. I am one of the climate change coordinators at the Highland Council. Back in May, I presented a paper to the Climate Change Working Group on the Just Transition. At this stage, the Just Transition Commission had just published its recommendations to the Scottish Government on how we can ensure a fair and equal transition to carbon neutrality. Since then, the Scottish Government have published their own reports in response to the recommendations set out by the Commission. I will briefly outline what a just transition will look like and identify the recommendations put forward by the Commission and Scottish Government's response. The quote on screen really gives you an essence of what a just transition is really looking to achieve. So in terms of setting the scene, the Scottish Government has pledged to end Scotland's contribution to climate change no later than 2045, and the Highland Council has recommitted to achieving a carbon neutral Inverness and low carbon Highland by 2025. We need to ensure the transition to carbon neutrality is equal and inclusive. This transition will be transformational for our economy and society, one which we need to guarantee is achieved by the people of Scotland, not done back to the people of Scotland. In the Highland context, we need to address the unique challenges which are experienced across the Highland region. To this end, the Just Transition Commission was set up in 2018 to engage with different people across all sectors and social backgrounds to develop an understanding of the unique challenges which we face in achieving carbon neutrality. The report from the Just Transition Commission explores where we are now, how we deliver a just transition, and provides a look to the future. It provides practical, realistic, and affordable recommendations that will support Scottish ministers to take action. Scottish Government's response includes their vision for a fairer, greener 2045 and sets out their plans for a national just transition planning framework. And they have recently appointed Richard Lockhead as the Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work. In terms of what a just transition means for the Highlands, In terms of our energy system, the transition from carbon-intensive systems to more sustainable sources will be key to this transition. Investment in green hydrogen, so for example, the Cromarty Firth, and renewable energy generations, for example, the Rivernest Hydro, we want to ensure Highlands is seen as a hub for sustainable energy practices, and people are offered training to develop skills required to transition into these industries. For our industrial base, there will be a greater inward investment in local supply chains. Community wealth building, which I'll speak about a little bit later, explores this and outlines strategies which can help investments stay within the Highlands. We need to work hard to involve and empower communities to embrace this green industrial revolution. For our buildings and how we heat them, there is a great deal of challenges which come with this, especially in the Highland region due to the geography and the age of our properties. As we transition, we need to tackle the prevalent issue of fuel poverty and safeguard people's rights to a warm home. For our transport system, obviously we've nearly got 8,000 kilometres of roads in Highlands, so this means that we have a higher dependence on cars. We need to develop on the success of the EV infrastructure and outline and implement more wide-scale active travel networks across Highlands. For how we use and manage our lands, we have a 20% larger land mass than Wales, and around 68% of our Highlands is peatlands. The Just Transition Commission outlined that in the coming years there will be less agricultural land and more woodland and peatland cover. So in terms of delivering on a just transition, the Just Transition Commission report outlines 4 key messages which umbrella 24 recommendations. These can be summarised by pursue, equip, empower and invigorate, and share. I won't go into all of them now, but in a Highland context, there is a strong focus on place-based approaches and empowering communities to make the changes required to transition to carbon neutrality. We need to build strong local supply chains and focus on establishing social partnerships, ensuring equality is at the centre. Scottish Government's response to the recommendations include their strategic approach to the Just Transition by developing and publishing a Just Transition planning framework which will guide the journey to net zero. In terms of equipping our workforce, they have developed the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan. Skills Development Scotland are implementing this and combining recommendations by the Just Transition Commission. They will design and implement a skills guarantee for workers as part of the Scottish Government's Green Jobs Workforce Academy. In terms of empowering and invigorating our communities, there's the new public engagement strategy, which sets out an approach for involving the people of Scotland in the response to the global climate emergency. For sharing the benefits widely and ensuring the burdens are distributed on the basis of ability to pay, Scottish Government outline how they are already working and taking action on this, such as through their investments in energy efficiency and fuel poverty programmes and the establishment of Consumer Scotland. So looking to the future, Scottish Government's visions include fair work practices for all, food locally sourced and of high quality, well-insulated homes which are renewably heated and powered, a low carbon infrastructure which focuses on nature-based solutions, and an oil and gas infrastructure and workforce which has been at the forefront of a green revolution. Building resilience into our infrastructure, approach to the environment, financial initiatives, and across the wider initiative are all set out in their vision for 2045. The Council are in a strong position to adopt the principles of a just transition. We have recently launched the Highland Adapts initiative, which focuses on a place-based approach to climate change adaptation. and will provide a crucial steer and delivery mechanism for the just transition. We also need to build on the strong progress to date for our electric vehicle infrastructure and make it more inclusive, make more inclusive active travel networks for all people within Highland. Also, by embedding the concept of community wealth building into the Council's economic recovery, we can integrate sustainable practices which benefit everyone in the Highland region, improving our local supply chains, which will have a wide-reaching benefit for the region. Scotland and Highland Council have a real opportunity to underpin the principles of a just transition and set an example of good practice for not only other local authorities across Scotland, but also globally. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Katie. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our speakers for today's first session and to also thank you all for attending so far. I would also like to remind you that we have 2 workshops later today. Our Net Zero workshop will begin at 1:50, so 10 to 2, and our Resilient Communities workshop will begin at 3:35. Links to both of these workshops can be found by going to the Highland Council homepage, clicking on the link to the conference, which is in the top right-hand corner, and then scrolling down to the workshop links. We are now going to take a short tea break, so this is the time to stretch your legs, quickly let the dog out or grab a cup of coffee. We'll be starting our next section focusing on resilient communities at 1:15 sharp, so make sure you're back in just under 15 minutes. Okay, so bye for now.
Okay. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Joe, for hosting a wonderful session on net zero. As many of you may have experienced technical issues with accessing the event this morning, there is now the updated link on our intranet and our web page. If you can share this with anyone you know who is having difficulty accessing the event, that would be absolutely fantastic. Now, before we start with the Resilient Communities session, we have a special message from Councillor Trish Robertson, Chair of the Climate Change Working Group.
Council Climate Change Conference. Today features topics under the headings of net zero and resilient communities. We will discover the serious need for changes in how we live, work and play. Decarbonisation is a necessary step. We can all do something, but the changes needed will require initial investment and lead to reduced costs in the long term. We need to look to nature and the seasons and buy local and in season. Sustainability is another word we have become familiar with. The Rose Project will tell us how they will create a region of sustainable excellency in Caithness and Sutherland. There are many groups working towards carbon neutral actions. As individuals, we also have a part to play. Please take from what you learn this week, make it personal and invest in the future by adopting new green habits into your life. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Trish, for that brilliant introduction. We will now have a keynote speech from Richard Lockhead, MSP, Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work. We are delighted to share this message with you today.
I would like to thank the Highland Council for inviting me to contribute to this event, and I would like to thank you all for joining today. In Scotland, we are committed to playing our part in ending our contribution to climate change. Our legislation has committed us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2045, so that the emissions we put into the atmosphere will be balanced by those removed. It won't be easy, but by doing so, we have a chance to secure a better future for everyone. Reaching net zero and preparing for climate change will transform the country and the economy as well. Greenhouse gas emissions come from everyday activities, burning fuel in factories, powering cars, heating homes and how we use our land. So what we do in our everyday lives and how our society works in the future will look very different from today. And it's within our gift to ensure that our future will be fairer and more equitable for all. There has never been such global momentum on climate action. The COP26 summit is now in full swing, and it's the world's best chance to deliver lasting action towards a net zero future in a way that's fair and just. We have committed to a summit that holds people and well-being at the centre of all we do and try to achieve, and we're working to create a positive legacy for Scotland. My position is new within the government, and I'm responsible for leading an exciting agenda that will coordinate action across government and oversee a national mission of fairness and opportunity as Scotland moves to net zero. A just transition is both the outcome, a fairer, greener future for everyone, and the process that must be undertaken in partnership with those impacted by the transition to net zero. Just transition is how we get to a net zero and climate resilient economy by 2045 in a way that also delivers fairness and tackles inequality and injustice. Our National Just Transition Planning Framework also sets out our intention to ensure the transition to net zero is done in a managed and fair way across each key sector, like energy, transport and agriculture. Our approach will centre on the idea of co-design. In practice, this means we'll ensure that those who stand to be most impacted by the transition to net zero are given a voice in determining their future. Local authorities are crucial to this work, and we will be reaching out to partners across Scotland in the coming weeks as we start work on our first Just Transition plan as part of the Energy Strategy Refresh. We also announced our intention to explore the use of green participatory budgeting as part of our wider support for community-led climate action. This approach allows local communities themselves to hold the purse strings and decide on the projects that can best help them to tackle and adapt to the impacts of climate change in their local areas. We are also developing a network of regional climate action hubs that will aim to drive widespread awareness and behavioural change. In September, we launched 2 Pathfinder hubs, one of these being led by Thurso Development Community Trust, and will cover the Northern Highlands and Islands area, testing the model and approach to help the wider network evolve. As Scotland plays host to COP26 and a vast array of associated climate events and discussions, I encourage you all to work with us in using it as a pivotal moment to help plan how we transition to net zero across sectors of our society, and in the process create a fairer, greener Scotland that we can all be proud to call home. Thank you again for the invitation to be part of this important event, and I wish you a successful and thought-provoking conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lockhead, for that brilliant speech. We are now turning our attention to the incredible work already taking place in and around the Highlands. We're going to hear from communities taking action in Highland, and we'll start off in the far north with Simon Middlemiss, owner and project manager of the Rose project.
This is a short video about the Rose project. So what is Rose? It's an identity, a brand for the Caithness and North Sutherland region, which is currently well known for its nuclear research and now decommissioning activities. But the region is diversifying into offshore wind farm support for the Beatrice field, tidal energy in the Pentland Firth with the Magen array, a growing tourism sector, and many others. But how would you summarise this in a short, focused statement? Why not the region of sustainability excellence, Rose? A region which demonstrates how to maximise the benefits of our natural assets and skills, creating a successful economy to benefit our entire community, focusing on a topic which will come to dominate our work and home lives in the future. The concept is a very simple one. We don't argue about who has created the climate effects we are beginning to see, or what the severity might be, even though we believe the climate and environmental experts that it is man-made. That's because every major political party in Scotland and indeed the UK believes there is a climate emergency. So whether you believe in man-made climate change or not is irrelevant, because the government do. All governments do. And are already taking action which will increase substantially over the next few years. So we want to persuade businesses and organisations in Caithness and North Sutherland they should accept this and take advantage of all the tremendous opportunities this will bring to a region like ours, and also mitigate the negative impacts that might otherwise be seen by the economy and community. Focus on future-proofing for the changes to come. Take advantage of being first movers and not ignore them.
Good afternoon, my name's Juliana. In the next minute and a half, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sustainability. In short, it looks to protect our natural environment as well as our human and ecological health while driving innovation and not compromising our way of life. Where does the term come from? Well, it's not a new idea. The movement has roots in social justice, conservation, internationalism and other past movements rich in history. What is new is the articulation of these ideas in the context of a global industrial and information society. What does it mean to business? Well, just to clarify, it simply isn't just the initialization of one program or system, it's a whole new way of doing business, a whole change in mindset. Companies need to be fully integrated in terms of how they operate and conduct business. There's no guide to tell you the steps that you need to take to be sustainable, and issues vary from sector to sector and from company to company. And more importantly, any company strategy on sustainability should fit with your organisation's culture to be effective. I think to be also effective, it really should permeate throughout your company. It impacts all aspects of business and it involves all of those in your supply chain and your value chain beyond and including producers, suppliers, consumers, employees, shareholders and even governments. There's various drivers, they might be global, they might be national, they might be local, there may be UK government targets. The pressure may come from your customers, it may come from your competitors, it may come from your stakeholders. Equally, it might be driving your company image, your reputation, your brand and your values. I think the motivations behind sustainability are really complex, they're personal and very diverse. It's very unrealistic to talk about them in a minute and a half, why so many of us are working towards this goal. Yet for most of us, it comes down to the kind of future we're leaving behind as a value in business. It's shared by many of us who demonstrate this in our policies, our everyday activities, and our behaviours. And this is also one of the key aims of ROSE. Thank you.
There are at least 4 main reasons why we chose this area for the ROSE project, other than the fact that Simon, Alice and I all live here. Firstly, we are in a relatively isolated location with a defined population. What we do here should stand out, and what stands out gets noticed. Secondly, 2 of the region's largest employers are in various stages of closure, so we believe that we should offer something that could generate opportunities that might replace them, whilst taking the area into a sustainable direction. Thirdly, the area has outstanding natural assets such as the flow country you can see behind me, which includes 1,500 square miles of carbon-absorbing blanket bog. We have very productive renewable power projects, such as wind and tidal, all over the region. Finally, we are working with like-minded local organisations, such as the Caithness and North Southern Regeneration Partnership, the Caithness Chamber of Commerce, and the Environmental Research Institute, just to name 3. To many in the commercial sector, however, sustainability remains little more than just a concept. So to that end, we are developing tangible tools that should demonstrate its commercial benefits and value, such as the Business Enterprise Sustainability Tool, or BESS for short. This will be a decision support system that will assess an organisation's relative position against the 4 pillars of sustainability and ensure that their presence benefits the Caithness and North Southern community. Secondly, a sustainability-biased prioritisation tool that will be given to the CNSRP that should enable them to assess the overall value of their own projects and activities through the lens of the 4 pillars of sustainability. And finally, the triple bottom line accounting tool. This should be a simple self-assessment tool that will add the dimensions of people and planet to the usual single bottom line driver, which of course is profit.
From a practical perspective, the region needs to shift their energy consumption to renewable sources and offset any emissions which can't come from renewable generation. We arguably have unrivaled resources for both these goals. Caithness and North Sutherland currently generate over 1,200% of electricity consumption from large-scale onshore wind and tidal power, with increasing amounts of offshore wind being built and planned. This renewable generation provides capacity to decarbonise heat and transport via both electrification and green hydrogen. Caithness and Sutherland are also home to the peatlands that make up the flow country, and increasing restoration allows carbon to be sequestered and stored and allowed peatland carbon credits to be available to local, national and international requirements with associated benefits to biodiversity. These 2 considerations allow Caithness and Sutherland to develop a case where businesses can use locally generated renewable energy and sequester carbon in local sinks. There is a unique selling point here when we consider that the marketing of the world's largest tidal stream array, Scotland's largest offshore wind farms, and the potential UNESCO World Heritage status for the flow country. Products and services can be marketed as net zero with local sources of renewable energy and carbon. To tie this together, there's a requirement for accreditation for this to be meaningful and not just greenwashing. We need to also ensure a just transition and facilitate the transition to sustainability in a socially just way.
ROSE can only succeed if we tell others what we're up to and share our experiences with regard to what works and what didn't. But we also need to learn from others and help others understand what it all means. To do this, we'll be communicating widely via our website. The link is below, rose-sustainability.co.uk. We will be producing regular newsletters with updates on what's going on, events that have happened, articles from wider news, and upcoming events and visits too. It will evolve as what you want to read about changes. Our social media accounts will be another way to connect with us. We are on Twitter at RoseSust, Facebook and also LinkedIn. We will be producing a blueprint for change in additions that will highlight what we've been doing, what went well, what didn't go so well, so that others might learn. By recording what we encounter, we should be able to help others succeed and avoid any known challenges. As well, we are looking at a range of education and training for companies, organisations, individuals, the general public, students and more. Joining in with other like-minded organisations is really important to us, and we are keen to connect with you. By collaborating, we can all achieve our aims.
So who are we? It's myself, Alison and Julian. We will be forming a community interest company, but are presently all volunteers. We work closely with Professor Juliana Powell-Turner, one of the leading experts in the UK on this subject, who has practical experience of dealing with everything from multinational companies to very small SMEs. We also work with Magnus Davidson of the Thurso Environmental Research Institute. We have access to the expertise of our two local experts, Julian and Magnus, who you've just heard from. They can help and assist others, and if we need additional support, Juliana is also helping us. We are not looking to do this in isolation. When we've developed our toolkit, we want to work with others in the region, such as the Caithness North Sutherland Regeneration Partnership, Chamber of Commerce and Community Development Trusts, so that everyone can benefit. We don't mind if the term rose isn't used in the future. We don't mind if others have different ideas which are adopted, but we do care about getting on and picking up all the advantages that being sustainable can bring to our region's economy, community, and most importantly, look after our resources and the environment. We want Caithness and North Sutherland to benefit from all our work, and we want to share what we have done with others and learn from others so we can all benefit from a sustainable future. The time for action is now. The one thing we can't do is nothing. To find out more, follow the link below, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Simon, and everyone involved in the Rose project for taking the time to contribute to this conference. It's a really fantastic project for Caithness and Sutherland region, and we will now hear from Anna Padfield from Planet Sutherland and the Future Communities Highlands and Islands group, who will speak about community action in the Highlands.
Well, hi, this is Anna from Planet Sutherland chatting with you today from the outside office. I did actually start this recording off inside the polytunnel, but the noise got a little bit too much with the rain, so hopefully we'll be okay for a little while. I'm planning today to share with you a little bit about what Planet Sutherland is all about, but also to ask everybody to sign up to a little pledge. So one of the objectives of Planet Sutherland is to help people take that first step, to help people start that conversation and to do something. Yet it's hard, I know, to talk about climate change. It's almost like it's a taboo subject. What will our friends and family think if we raise the topic? What will our business colleagues think? Will they just think we're stupid? How do we feel ourselves? Do we feel strong enough in ourselves to actually have that conversation? Or would it be much easier to just move on with our day-to-day lives? We've got enough to worry about after all. We've got COVID, we've got health, we've got finance, we've got Brexit. All of these things are throwing puzzles at us, throwing problems at us in our day-to-day lives. Really hard. Interestingly though, a little bit of research showed that 80% of us are actually worried about climate change, yet only 30% of us are worried about COVID, which is interesting given that, given the impact that COVID's had across the world. It's quite interesting. So is climate change just too scary to talk about? Well, the old adage holds true, a problem shared is a problem halved. And that was really where Planet Sutherland started from. And thanks again for the support of my friends who helped get it off the ground. So even the NHS website actually suggests that if we're troubled by something, talking about it can really, really help. Talking about it and getting outside and getting some physical exercise. Doing something physical is probably the easiest thing to do. Simply getting out for a walk or doing some gardening will help us feel better and help save the planet actually. If we're outside, we're not using the heating as much, and also then if we're growing something in the garden, we're helping with the CO2 absorption. So how can we broach the subject talking about something? Well, actually, the easiest thing to do is to just think about something fun to talk about that in turn, helps the planet. So instead of having a coffee with a friend, go for a walk in the woods. How about getting your communities to start growing food in boxes, or in unused places along the streets? growing lettuce or growing herb in a box in the community can really help to bring the community together, place to chat, pick a few herbs, have a tastier tea. For businesses, why not get those green champion hats on and really look at how we can solve business puzzles, save money and help the planet all at the same time. For us as individuals, why don't we just take that one step, grow lettuce, hug a tree, have a coffee outside, and grow your network. We don't all work alone. We've got a whole raft of people out there in the Highlands and Islands and beyond to help us. We, Planet Sutherland as a group, started a network called Future Communities Highlands and Islands. So anybody's welcome, any groups are welcome to join that if they're looking to improve the situation about climate change. And we also have the Highlands and Islands Orchard Network for those interested in orchards. And with all of the initiatives starting through the Highland Council and beyond, including the climate hubs in the north of Highlands and Islands and over in the northeast, all of these networks are really going to help us to build what we do. And finally, getting back to the little challenge that I mentioned at the beginning. Every single one of us has got the opportunity to go to the next meeting that we're invited to. On the agenda with that meeting, there'll be an AOCB. Let's make that AOCB any other climate business and get climate change onto the agenda of every single group. How about that for a challenge? And of course, you're not alone. There's loads of help out there. So thanks very much for listening. Anna from Planet Sutherland in the rain. Have fun. Have a good day. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Anna, for that brilliant and inspirational message and the commitment to recording that in the classic Highland weather of rain. And thank you for challenging us all to keep speaking about climate change. We will now hear from Martin Shering and Penny Edwards from the Pebble Trust.
Hello, I'm Penny Edwards.
And I'm Martin Shering.
And we're two of the Pebble Trust 7 trustees.
We're a small charity providing funding for projects in the Highlands and Islands that address climate change and promote the sustainable use of resources. Our mission is to apply our modest funding to make the biggest possible difference, and we're able to support either communities, businesses or individuals to put their ideas into action.
We share the UN Secretary General's view that we've now reached Code Red for humanity. In response, we recently increased our maximum grant level from £5,000 to £10,000, and we're now asking new applicants to show how they'll minimise resource needs, including the reuse and recycling of materials. We make it easy to apply for funding with a simple application form, no deadlines and no match funding requirements.
And as well as making grants, the Pebble Trust has developed its own projects in areas where we think we can make a difference.
So we've produced this guide to the sustainable renovation of homes to help reduce a whopping 15% contribution domestic heating makes to carbon emissions.
Also, together with Transition Black Isle, we initiated the Highland Good Food Partnership to provide the local food system, to improve the local food system at a time when global food supply chains are really creaking, and around a third of the world's greenhouse gas emissions come from the food sector.
We'll soon be releasing a study on forestry and soil carbon. There's a clamour for more trees to act as a carbon sink, but we know ploughing peaty soils to plant Sitka spruce releases CO2 and it's bad for wildlife. So more trees aren't always such a good idea.
And finally, we recently started an internship programme to provide opportunities for a new generation of young people to enter the green economy in the Highlands.
You can find out lots more about us and the projects we've funded on www.thepebbletrust.org.
Thank you so much, Martin and Penny. And I think we are definitely getting a good advert for the Highlands wind resource in Highland. Another fantastic message. We are now going to hear from Becky Shaw, Rural Development Advisor at Nature Scott, who will be speaking about the jobs for a green recovery.
Hello, I'm Becky Shaw. I work as Rural Development Advisor at Nature Scott, which has recently been rebranded from Scottish Natural Heritage. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you today. And I've been asked to speak about the future of nature-based jobs in the Highlands. For the past 18 months or so, we've been looking at jobs which will be required in nature-based sectors for the transition to net zero and the skills that will be required in these roles. Scotland's target of reaching net zero emissions by 2045 and addressing the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change will require transformational change across our economy. We need to focus on solutions based in nature, such as peatland restoration, natural flood management, woodland planting, and protecting and restoring blue carbon habitats in our seas. More than 30% of Scotland's net zero target will be met by changes in how we manage and use land and sea, so nature has a huge role to play. This change brings challenges, but also significant opportunities in terms of upskilling and reskilling the workforce to do the jobs that will be required over the next 2 decades and longer. Jobs that will help us ensure a nature-rich future for Scotland and an effective response to the climate emergency. Developing the right skills for jobs that fit this ambition for the future is crucially important. So in 2020, we commissioned some research to help us understand what skills will be needed in nature-based sectors, and additionally, what skills are in short supply at the moment. The overarching context for this work is the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan published late last year, which sets out the changes needed in our skills system to help us reach net zero. In our own research, we defined nature-based sectors broadly, so as to include use of land and sea for agriculture, forestry, wildlife management, aquaculture and fisheries, sectors highly dependent on nature, such as food and drink and tourism, as well as activities which we would describe as nature-based solutions to climate change. We also included sectors which might be more surprising: urban green infrastructure and the emerging green finance sector. Our research found there's significant opportunity for further growth in nature-based jobs. To give you a few statistics, in 2019, jobs in nature-based sectors accounted for 195,000 jobs in the Scottish economy, so that's approximately 7.5% of all Scottish jobs. In the 5 years to 2019, jobs in nature-based sectors grew 5 times faster than the average for all jobs, and nature-based jobs made up 1/3 of job growth in that same period. Some of the main growth areas are obviously in woodland creation and in peatland restoration, but there are also increasing opportunities to develop urban green infrastructure, engage in the management of coastal and marine habitats, and become skilled in green finance mechanisms. I'll touch on just a few of these. Around 20% of Scotland is made up of peat soils, including vast tracts of the Highlands, and many peatlands are degraded. The Scottish Government recently announced a 10-fold increase in peatland restoration, at least £250 million of investment over the next 10 years. To put this in context, in the 8 years to 2020, we've restored 25,000 hectares of peatland in Scotland. We're now talking about restoring 250,000 hectares by 2030. The scale of increase is exponential, and the workforce is currently nowhere near sufficient to do this. We need a huge scaling up of people skilled in peatland restoration, from those advising land managers and designing peatland restoration schemes, to ecological clerks of works, those project managing the delivery of the restoration schemes, and the contractors responsible for implementing it. Digger drivers on difficult terrain skilled in peatland restoration techniques are this season's hottest property. Urban nature-based solutions can help our towns and villages mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change and make them nicer, healthier places to live. This includes investment in active travel and good quality green space, sustainable urban drainage and water management, and enhancing biodiversity and climate change resilience through retrofitting public spaces. The ERDF and Scottish Government funded Green Infrastructure Strategic Intervention, in which we're the lead partner, will conclude in 2023, by which point over £40 million of investment in green infrastructure will have been put in place to increase biodiversity, restore ecosystem functions and improve livelihoods and quality of life in urban areas. This project has demonstrated the key role of green infrastructure in tackling a variety of issues in urban areas, and there will be much more of this to come. Developing these interventions requires people skilled in community engagement, water management, the design and implementation of active travel options, ecological engineers, planning, urban growers and more. So there are significant opportunities in nature-based sectors, but our analysis suggests that the workforce to deliver nature-based solutions is currently insufficient in number, skill and training for these roles. That's why it's important that we develop the right skills in the right place across multiple sectors, from data analysis and earth observation to ecological engineering, and from management of land and water to green finance. The ministerial forward to the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan is clear on the role of skills in ensuring a just transition. Enhancing access to skills training is critical. Key to our transition to net zero is ensuring that everyone can benefit from the opportunities and no one is left behind, it says. So what are we doing at NatureScot to support the development of skills in the Highlands? We're working closely with organisations across the Highlands at a strategic level to understand better where the opportunities are and to enable opportunities for skills, growth and employment. We've identified a set of priority actions with emphasis on our own leadership role with biodiversity and climate change and our support for a green recovery. Those priorities will support our work in terms of advancing nature-based solutions for a thriving environment and leading net zero natural resource management on land and sea. Two of the immediate actions identified in the Skills Action Plan were the establishment of a Green Jobs Workforce Academy and a Green Jobs Skills Hub. We're inputting and collaborating closely with the Scottish Government as these are launched and grown. On our own part, we've published an action plan for nature-based jobs, which sees us leading a skills development strategy for Peatland, engaging with young people through careers events and information, and working on a project to increase the diversity of the workforce in nature-based jobs. We're also convening an external steering group to guide our work in the development of nature-based jobs and skills. We're also looking internally at the resources and knowledge that we need as an organisation and that we need to invest in. NatureScot's programme for youth employment currently offers 37 roles across a range of skills and knowledge so as to give as broad an opportunity as possible. Next year we aim to offer similar placements again and may also expand into introducing foundation apprenticeships for young people still at school. In future years we'll also formalise our offer of work experience to help people get a better understanding of what jobs in nature-based sectors look like. So to conclude, our message is that nature-based sectors are key in tackling climate and biodiversity crises, and we want to play a role in developing the right skills in our workforce to help us meet these challenges. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Becky. Really interesting and absolutely beautiful with that bird song in the background. On to Colin Simpson now, who is the Principal Tourism Officer for Highland Council, who will speak about green and eco-tourism in the Highlands.
Hello, I'm Colin Simpson and I'm the Highland Council's Principal Tourism Officer, so I'm going to talk to you a bit today about tourism and how that might fit in with climate change. As I'm talking about tourism, which is when people go out and about, I'm going to go out and about for the next few minutes. So when you talk about tourism, an awful lot of people will first of all think about travelling abroad, package holidays, flights, etc. And in that sense, obviously tourism's not really the greenest of industries. But I would argue that travel is something which can have a very positive side as well. For many people, it's through travelling that they actually learn a lot more about the world, and that in turn can be quite a good way of us helping to tackle climate change. People learn a lot more about the landscapes, the wildlife, the habitats and so on in the areas that they visit, and then have a feeling that they ought to be doing more to try and protect them. Probably the best example of that will be places like Africa, where there have been all the efforts to protect wildlife, but it happens with our own landscapes in Scotland and in the Highlands. You get a similar effect from people who come here to walk, to climb, to paddle, to ride, and that leads to some demand for them to look after these places. Indeed, many of our best known conservation organisations like the John Muir Trust, the National Trust for Scotland, have memberships that are largely outside the area, and they've been driven to join and to support their efforts simply because they've been to the area on holiday. So what I'd like to look at now is one of the best known things in Highland tourism, the North Coast 500. On the one hand, as it's a touring route, I think people would say that's not necessarily the greenest of activities. On the other hand, in a typical year, twice as many UK residents go overseas as overseas people come to the UK. So if we can get more of them to stay at home and travel a route like that, that's probably better than them making longer haul journeys. Of course, not everybody thinks the North Coast 500 is a good thing, but I would argue that this is a really important part of us building resilient communities in the Highlands. Some communities have been very active themselves in catering for visitors. A perfect example of this being Falls of Shun Visitor Centre near Lairg. There, the community's taken on running the business, and they in turn employ quite a lot of local people. They and many businesses like them are also great users of local suppliers. They're tapping into the visitor demand for authenticity, and in so doing, they create quite a lot of supply chain benefits across the area. In particular, they buy lots of produce, as can be seen in the menu there. There are also direct business opportunities in terms of catering for the visitors themselves. We have seen new businesses like the Zipwire at Durness. There's a new cafe outside the campsite at Clachtall. We're seeing many crofters starting to take motorhomes on their crofts for overnight stops. So quite a number of new opportunities, and that's really helping to keep people, including in particular young people, in their communities when in years gone by these people would have left the area and moved away. And another part of keeping communities resilient is making sure they have the right transport connections, and this is again something where tourism can help, because there are lots of routes in the Highlands which wouldn't be viable if it wasn't for the additional visitor usage. So getting our visitors here, getting them using public transport services also benefits the local people by protecting these routes. And of course, use of public transport is good in terms of reducing our energy usage, as is the use of electric vehicles. And one of the things we're seeing around the area just now is the provision of a lot more charge points to allow people to tour the Highlands using an electric vehicle. And this is even being supported by the private sector, with companies like Tesla rolling out their own network of points on routes like the North Coast 500. So there are lots of positives from tourism, particularly around community resilience and energy use. But of course, these things don't happen by themselves, and that's where we come in. I think we need to keep working hard, keep encouraging others, and then we will see tourism continue to make things better for the Highlands.
Thank you so much, Colin, for that fantastic talk, and thank you so much for including your dog in the chat as well. I'm sure everyone really appreciated that. Now we will hear from Vinnie, who will speak about the Scottish Cities Alliance.
The Scottish Cities Alliance is a unique collaboration between the 7 Scottish cities and the Scottish Government, working together to maximise the country's economic growth. Since its inception, the Alliance has always had a focus on sustainability through its Smart Cities workstream, the 8 City programme, which delivers an ambitious programme to make the Scottish cities innovative and sustainable, or through its hydrogen workstream, which aims to solidify Scotland's future as a world-leading producer of green hydrogen. The Alliance's policy work over the last 2 years has been informed by the Scottish Cities Outlook Report, an independent research produced by the Fraser-Vallner Institute, which outlines the key challenges and opportunities facing the Scottish cities, which they could work on collaboratively. One of these challenges is the transition to net zero carbon challenge, which the Alliance's partners have been focusing on for the last 1.5 years. Cities, national agencies and the Scottish Government worked together to develop a co-designed action plan for a transition to net zero, with a particular focus on 4 key themes: waste, transport, energy efficiency and low carbon heat. Collectively called the Transition to Net Zero Carbon Action Plan, the project plan details the opportunities to work together as cities, agencies and governments over the next period, so that the Scottish cities can cumulatively play their part as key agents of change in meeting the Scottish Government's 2045 net zero target, while at the same time maximising economic and well-being benefits across the cities. The Net Zero transition is a collective task, and we work best when we learn from each other, which is why we set up a Scottish Cities peer-to-peer network to encourage knowledge sharing across the cities, but also to provide an inclusive space for cities to share best practices. As part of this network and in partnership with the Improvement Service, we're also delivering an ambitious bespoke carbon literacy training program to all elected members across the cities so that we can help leaders make the difficult decisions required when tackling climate change. We recognise that strong leadership is key, and the Alliance will continue to provide a forum for all partners to work collaboratively on the climate change agenda.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Vinny. It's really great to hear about that collective action which is going on in and around Scotland. Now we'll hear from Jane Morrison, who will speak about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm not an economics expert, but I'm going to talk about economics today anyway. So I've spent my career so far working to tackle environmental challenges, from pollution to biodiversity loss to climate change. And I've worked with businesses and communities all over Scotland, as well as here in the Highlands, to improve our environment and to help people appreciate it more. I grew up in the Highlands near Ballyhoolish and currently live in Oban. Coming from an area where the land and nature is such a fundamental part of how we live has definitely shaped my love for the natural world and my passion to protect it. But you might be wondering why I'm here to talk about economics. So the more I got into working on issues I cared about, like addressing climate change and inequality, the more I realised that a lot of the work was being focused on what I would term as sticking plasters, or basically the symptoms of something going wrong in the wider system. In order to really solve these issues, we need to go back a step and transform how we're set up in the first place. If we start looking at the problems we're seeing in the world and ask why they exist, what's driving them, we can begin to get to the heart of the problem. So when I started asking myself these questions, like why is climate change happening? Why are loneliness, mental health problems, and food bank use on the rise? Why does politics seem more polarised than ever? I kept coming back to a commonality in what was driving them, which is the system we live in, and ultimately economics. So admittedly, at the time, as a biologist, I didn't even really know what economics was, and I was far more interested in looking at ecosystems than I was at understanding economic theory. But after I'd had my, oh, that's what economics is moment, I realised that within that, there's a huge opportunity for transformational change with far-reaching impacts on my own work. And this is what led me to the work of Wellbeing Economy Alliance, or WEAll for short. And I joined the board of the Scotland Hub. WEAll is a movement made up of people, organisations and governments all over the world who are working to catalyse change to a wellbeing economy. So a wellbeing economy is, in essence, one that delivers social justice on a healthy planet, which sounds simple. But when you think about the word well-being alongside the word economy, you might think that these things don't actually have that much in common, and in fact it can seem like they are at odds with each other. It's true that our current economic model has provided progress for many countries and people. There's been fruits of our growth, and we can probably all think of our own examples of these, whether it's more mothers and babies surviving childbirth, certain diseases being eradicated, literacy rates increasing, and so on. But the crucial thing to remember here is that these positive steps have come about when we use the fruits of our labour to invest in collective institutions like health and education. But we're now facing a different question, and that is, are the fruits of our growth beginning to rot? So aspects of the progress that we've made are now being threatened by climate change, inequality, extremist politics, and environmental breakdown. The benefits of growth are being enjoyed by fewer and fewer people. Most economies centre GDP, gross domestic product, in their decision making, but GDP provides a very narrow view of economic success. It's basically an algorithm for how quickly we can turn natural resources and people's efforts into money. It does not measure what matters most to people. Robert Kennedy said, GDP measures everything except that which is worthwhile. It counts for things like deforestation, but it doesn't put any value on living forests, which provide a home for nature, a space for recreation, and manufacture an essential condition for life, oxygen. GDP measures the production of medications, but doesn't put a value on us being healthy. It measures if we work, but it tells us nothing about how meaningful our work is, or if we actually enjoy it. And crucially, it assigns no value to unpaid domestic and caring work, which holds up our society. In chasing growth in GDP as our only goal, we often create problems in other important areas. For example, increasing carbon footprints, air and water quality issues, increasing rates of anxiety, suicide, and depression. On the other hand, well-being economics would encompass and measure everything that matters to people: our environment, both natural and built, health, both mental and physical, participation, trust in institutions, the work we do, the lifestyles we live, the food we eat, and everything else that you can think of. Measures of success in a well-being economy would take into consideration environmental and social impact, along with the economic impact of decisions, and not just deliver over the short term, but in the long term also. Moving to this new model of economics will create some upfront need for investment, but it will also reduce the amount of money we spend on failure demand. And this is the cycle of creating problems that cost more to fix in the long run. Our new report that we launched this month has shown that fixing these issues upstream could save taxpayers billions of pounds in Scotland. A well-being economy would deliver good lives for people the first time around and avoid having to deliver expensive downstream interventions to fix the social and environmental damage caused by growth-focused economies. It would deliver a fair distribution of wealth, health, and well-being while protecting the planet's resources for future generations and other species. We wouldn't be content to ask policy, government, and charities to fix, heal, and clean up, but instead the economy would be designed in a way that gets it right first time around, and it would do more of the heavy lifting by regenerating the planet and delivering for communities rather than extracting from them. We would prioritise actions that have wider benefits for people and planet. All strands of society, government, businesses, and communities would be working together to deliver on this goal, and we would only pursue growth in areas that contribute to collective well-being, and we would shrink those areas of the economy that damage it. So at We All, we have identified 5 goals, which we've called the We All Needs, to help people apply this. So first of all, we all need fairness. And this is about having justice in all its dimensions at the heart of our economic systems, and the gap between the richest and the poorest reduced. We all need nature, a restored and safe natural world for all life. We all need participation. So this is about citizens being actively engaged in their communities and locally rooted economies. We all need dignity. Everyone has enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. And lastly, we all need connection. So this is about having a sense of belonging and institutions that serve the common good. By applying these principles to how we live, work, and make decisions, we can begin to repair, regenerate, and heal our relationship with nature and create more resilient and connected communities who can thrive. Sometimes I hear people describe humanity as a plague on the natural world. To me, as a biologist, this makes me despair, and it only serves to put distance between us and the beautiful and complex ecosystems that support our life. Although it's true that some societies are causing great harms, we are still a part of nature and we can be part of a healthy system. Many indigenous cultures have done so for millennia. It is our systems that are the problem, not us as a species. And the good news about that is that Systems are human-made and systems can be changed. When we see pictures like this, it's hard not to worry that this is the story of our future. It can be easier to imagine apocalyptic scenes like this than it can to imagine that we might do things differently. The stories we're telling are often of what happens if we fail, but a well-being economy offers something different, a positive vision that inspires us to act, and a story that we can move towards with courage and hope. We can all take steps to change the system driving climate change and inequality. This is something that's within all of our power. How we do that is up to us, be it through our work, our art, our conversations, or our community actions. A well-being economy simply asks for us to come together around what really matters to us. Things like our joy, our communities, nature, and enjoying the outdoors, music, health, and meaningful work. It asks us to count these things in our decision-making, rather than only valuing outdated measures of economic growth like GDP. I mentioned at the start of the talk that I'm not an economics expert. I hope you'll agree with me now after listening to this that achieving a well-being economy doesn't actually require us to be, just as solving the climate crisis isn't just for scientists to do. I'm not an economics expert, but I love taking my dog for a walk in a beautiful, clean, natural environment. I'm not an economics expert, but I'm passionate about myself and my community having a say in decisions that impact us. I'm not an economics expert, but I want to have a good work-life balance. And that's why changing the economic system is for me, and it is for all of us. This is something we all own already through our everyday actions and choices. We are already experts in our own backgrounds, our experiences, and how we live our lives. By working together with people who've got different skills to us and different experiences, we can start to find ways to build the solutions we need to heal nature and to deliver a different and fairer system. The climate emergency means that we must transform everything in society. Everything about how we live and work must change, and therefore every one of us who signed up to this conference is perfectly placed to be a leader in our own areas and to create that change. The solutions need to be designed by all of us, for all of us. So lastly, if anything I've talked about today has sparked your interest and you'd like to learn more about it, or see case studies of what this looks like in practice and meet others who are working to deliver a wellbeing economy both in Scotland and all over the world, then please come and join our Citizens Hub, which is an online space for our movement. We'd love to have you as part of it. We have so many resources and events that you can come to and people that you can talk to help you translate this concept into your work and life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was really interesting to hear all about the economic system and how we need to work with nature. Now we will hear from Hamish Trench, who is Chief Executive of the Scottish Land Commission. He will speak more about the land use for community benefit.
Trench, Chief Executive of the Scottish Land Commission. I'm going to talk for a short time just about a hot topic that's raised by many in Highland at the moment in relation to our land. And that's the emerging carbon and natural capital value, what this means for our land markets and land ownership. I think there's no question that at the moment we're in a decade of land use transformation for net zero. We'll see more woodland, peatland restoration, and better soil management. And we know that this is going to need significant private investment as well as public funding to meet the scale and pace of the challenge and change that's required. And it's clear that that investment is there. Private investors are, I think, rightly turning their attention to meeting the net zero challenge. So like any big shift, we can see opportunities and risks here. And there have been several headlines recently about green finance and green layers in the land market. So let's look for a minute at what is happening. I think what is clear is that land, and particularly upland areas actually, are finding new forms of value. The ability to sequester additional carbon is creating new revenue streams and new value. And how we harness this value for common benefit is, I think, going to be critical to making a just transition. Now, private investment in natural capital carbon is, of course, a good thing, and new partnerships are emerging all the time to explore how to do this. It's also introducing some new motivations for people to go and acquire land, and particularly for corporate and institutional investors in order to offset carbon emissions. And we've seen a number of acquisitions reported over recent months, including, for example, by Blue Dog and Standard Life. And increasingly, we're seeing some high prices that investors are willing to pay for land, prices well above those based on previous land uses, for example. So I think there are some understandable concerns being raised about the implications for land values, for communities, and for the pattern of land ownership itself. And certainly at the Land Commission, we're working fast to understand what the implications for the land market are. I'll say a little bit about what we're actually doing over the next few months at the Commission to work on this. First of all, we're working to bring together the evidence base of what is and is not happening, and that will include investigating the scale of both on and off-market land transactions, and understand the scale, nature, and number of transactions that are driven by natural capital and carbon values. And I think really transparency of this and shared information is going to be a really important starting point to understanding the implications and managing some of the risks. Secondly, we'll also be reviewing international and historic experience to help identify policy options and advise the Scottish Government. For example, we think there are lessons to be learned from previous natural resource booms, including oil and gas, and of course more recently renewables. And this work will look specifically at options for securing community benefit and different mechanisms potentially for securing both local community benefit and of course national community benefit. And I think the third element that we're working on is really to work directly with those in practice, and looking to understand, help shape with landowners, managers, communities and investors, and help build and shape responsible practice. It's very clear that this is happening around us at the moment. I think there's no need to wait for legislation or policy to do this well. In fact, I don't think we can necessarily wait for policy and legislation. There's a huge opportunity here to shape responsible practice as it's happening, as this market is developing around us at the moment. And I think at the heart of this, of course, are two core things. In Scotland, we already have a really clear statement of land rights and responsibilities, and a statement that sets out the balance of the public and private interests in land, and really a framework for responsible land ownership and use. So obviously any new landowner, whatever their motivation, will need to understand the expectations for community engagement and decisions about land, for example, and the other principles and expectations of responsible land ownership. And we're here at the Commission to help people understand what this looks like in practice and on the ground. So, for example, let's make sure that communities, local communities, are engaged before decisions about big land use change are announced. And then I think the second aspect is, of course, not just engagement, but is really the wider question of ensuring that communities and local economies benefit from new value emerging in the land. Given the pace and scale of change that's likely over the coming decade, and ensuring that some of this value is reinvested in local economies and communities, I think is going to be critical to success. We know that the pace and scale is going to be significant to carry and maintain community support for land use change over this time. It's really important that we're going to see benefit coming back into local economies from these new forms of value in land. And I think I would also flag, particularly in Highland, actually, I would flag the relevance of the regional land use partnerships as an approach, with the North West Highland pilot as one example. I think these new partnerships offer a really potentially very effective mechanism to bring together the collaboration needed to coordinate some of the choices about land use change, ensure these are well planned, ensure the decision making is transparent and has a clear governance process around it. So I think this scale of regional approach to some of the land use choices and integrating different land use objectives is going to be increasingly important for the next few years. So this whole question of the influence of natural capital and carbon in the land market and its influence on both our land use and land ownership is a rapidly developing, certainly a priority now for the Land Commission, and we're working to help people ensure how we do this well and how we realise the opportunities both for climate and communities together. And I think it is going to be one of the key areas of focus for us all in making sure that we make a just transition in this decade of change.
Thank you very much, Hamish, for that really interesting conversation about land use. So just to remind everyone, if you have any questions from any of the sessions this morning, please come along to the workshops. The Net Zero workshop will begin at 1:50 and the Resilient Communities workshop will start at 3:35. All the links are on the web page, our Highland Council web page. That's the Highland Climate Change Conference 2021. We'll now move on to hearing from Helen, who handles rural engagement at Zero Waste Scotland, and she will speak more about Zero Waste Scotland and the circular economy.
Hello, my name is Helen Lavery. I work for the not-for-profit environmental organisation Zero Waste Scotland. Zero Waste Scotland is funded by the Scottish Government, and our role is to support Scotland to use products and resources responsibly. At Zero Waste Scotland, we are taking a place-based approach to supporting the development of a circular economy. My role focuses on supporting the Highlands and Islands and wider rural Scotland to embrace models that add value to all of our resources and that reduce environmental impact. Today, I am going to provide an introduction to the circular economy and showcase some examples of it in action. So we can't really talk about the circular economy without first having a look at the current dominant linear model, where we take resources from source, we create something from them, we use it, and then we dispose of it. And this linear model is what drove the Industrial Revolution. It has allowed people to overcome challenges around food production, housing, and clothing. It has driven technological advances and innovations for decades. But today, the downsides of a linear economy are increasingly apparent and damaging. 4/5 or 80% of Scotland's carbon footprint comes from the vast amounts of goods and materials which we produce, we consume, and then we throw away. And we often throw away these products, often after just one use. And this is the single greatest cause of the climate crisis, and it's an issue that we all need to address. Our role at Zero Waste Scotland is to support a shift in these long-standing models to help people think and act differently about everything that we create, everything we buy and everything we use. And we're doing this through the development of a circular economy. And the circular economy is a fundamental shift in the way that we manufacture, the way that we use, and the way that we view materials and products. And it reduces waste to a minimum by recovering and reusing as many products and materials as possible over and over again. And the circular economy is built on the three core principles that you will see in this slide. 1, design out waste and pollution. 2, keep materials and products in use, and 3, regenerate natural systems. So in contrast to that linear model, it's a make, remake, reuse economy. And creating more sustainable business models isn't just about the environment. It can save money, it can build brand affinity with customers, it can provide businesses with a competitive advantage, boosting reputation, and creating resilience to external supply chain disruptions. For the consumer, the circular economy will provide high quality, functional and safe products which are efficient and affordable. They're going to last longer, and they're going to be designed for reuse, for repair, and for really high quality recycling. So circular economy models include resource recovery, sharing economies, utilising digital technologies to track and to maximise resource use, leasing instead of buying, companies providing products as a service so they can manage a product's life cycle more efficiently, reuse, remanufacturing, and circular design, where products are designed for repair and in ways that ensure products and their materials can be used again and again. Now, we don't have time to go into each strategy in detail, so let's focus on a few and showcase some examples of them in action, with some international, some Scottish, and some Highlands and Islands examples in there. So the first one, and one of the most important ones, is design. And design sits at the heart of the circular economy. To change the system, it requires us to redesign everything: products, business models, regions, and those linear systems that have lasted for centuries. When something is designed, really important decisions are made, and these impact on how it's manufactured, used, and what happens to it when it's no longer used or wanted. And it's really difficult to go back and change those decisions after the design phase. More than 3 out of 4 decisions that directly influence material selection and manufacturing processes are determined in the design phase, and over 80% of the ecological costs are determined before a product is even created. So we have to design products that are easily repaired or remanufactured, look at more modular designs, and consider how we can ensure the materials used can remain within the value chain, with manufacturers taking responsibility for the end of life of their products. And I've got a really good example of a company redesigning entire products in a completely different way in order to build in more circular models. And the next strategy that we'll have a look at is providing a product as a service. So here the manufacturer retains ownership of the product and provides it as a service to the customer. And this model presents an opportunity to offer greater customer service and also to retain customers for life. And a really good Scottish example of a company offering this is Glasgow-based Egg Lighting. So they operate under a model that lighting should last as long as buildings. And their lighting is provided as a service, and the LED smart technology is modular built so it can be repaired easily. If parts of the lighting system need removed, the materials are refurbished, keeping them within the cycle. The next one I wanted to have a look at is reuse. So using products and materials for their intended use for as long as possible. And a really good example of this is refillable packaging and zero waste shops, allowing customers to reuse packaging over and over again. Single-use packaging accounts for approximately 13% or 315,000 tonnes of all household waste in Scotland. Single-use grocery packaging is also responsible for a lot of the litter that we see across Scotland. The issue of dealing with single-use items is amplified in our rural and island communities where logistics are just much trickier. In 2020, Zero Waste Scotland awarded funding to reduce waste from single-use items across 12 islands, covering 20 local retailers. And it means that these retailers now have the dispensing and other equipment that enables customers to put their grocery products in reusable containers brought in from home. The next one that I wanted to focus on was repair. And design is obviously really important here to ensure that products can be separated and disassembled for repair easily. A good example of a local company leading the way across a number of these strategies, in fact, including repair, is ILM Highland in Alness. And they're a great social enterprise providing free access to specialist tradespeople and advisors to the elderly and those living with a disability. They also provide an electrical waste recycling and reuse service for the Highland area, collecting household and business electrical and electronic equipment to be disposed of responsibly. They also run an electrical retail shop, both online and in Alness, selling a huge range of quality refurbished electrical appliances. And their model really creates the option for people to choose refurbished goods. They provide access to spares, allowing for repair, making it easier to make better consumption choices locally. Choices which are not only good for the planet, but they're also good for your purse as well. And the final one I wanted to focus in on is the sharing economy. So sharing assets across multiple users, either through the manufacturer retaining ownership or peer-to-peer sharing, which is a really interesting model for our rural communities across the Highlands and Islands. And a really good Highland and Islands example is the Mull and Iona Community Trust Community Fridge. So surplus food is provided by local businesses or members of the public, and it's then made available for collection by people who've got a use for it within the community. And the fridge is promoted across the island to tourists, including on the ferry, encouraging them to donate their leftover provisions at the end of their stay on the island. And it's a great example of waste prevention through a sharing model, creating mechanisms for goods to remain within the value chain. And across those 9 strategies that we showed earlier in the slides, we can see that circular principles provide opportunities right across supply chains, from manufacturing of physical assets to the way that businesses operate and the way that customers engage, with options to move from consuming vast amounts of resources to instead using services, sharing and leasing to keep products and materials within the value chain for longer. So if you've been inspired to learn more, please check out our website, which has a huge range of resources for individuals and for businesses too. And I'm going to close the session with a clip showcasing our current responsible consumption campaign. Thank you.
Everything we buy has a carbon cost. Perhaps it's time to shop differently. To find out how to reduce, reuse and recycle more, visit Wasteland.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that powerful message and yes, that small clip at the end. And now we'll hear from Joan Laurie, who is the Development Manager at Thurso Community Development Trust.
Hello, I'm Joan Laurie and I'm the Development Manager for Thurso Community Development Trust, and I'll be telling you about the climate action projects we've carried out ourselves, how we embed climate action in everything that we do, and also the new North Highlands and Islands Climate Action Hub, which is a pilot from the Scottish Government, which we will be running. So we took the action very, very early on in doing all of our initial consultations that we were going to embed climate action in absolutely everything that we did, that we were always going to be mindful of the detail and how we operate as an organisation. And that's pretty far ranging. We haven't done very well with disposable items during COVID, but it is something that we are now working on as we are coming out of COVID, particularly for a meal service that we operate so that we no longer use disposables for that. We, from using environmentally friendly cleaning products in the public toilets that we use, to carbon offsetting and printing on recycled paper, our community magazine, encouraging active travel and working with organisations like Hightrans and Cycling UK. This is lovely Ava next to the National Cycle Route Market that's in Thurso, to procuring locally and also encouraging the community to shop locally. We took part in the Scotland Loves Local campaign, and we continue to do so to this day. We just keep on with that mantra. We also have a community market that we run because we would love to see local food producers in particular, that there's more of them, and we want to give them a route to market. We only use energy from companies who are wholly sourced from renewables, and in fact we're in the process of now changing to an energy company who not only wholly sourced from renewables but are also a social enterprise as well. Thurso Grows is the most obvious climate action project that people know us for. For Thurso Grows, we run a community garden space. It was always a community garden space. It was previously run by Caithness Biodiversity Group, who had struggled to get in volunteers, and they offered us the lease on it, even before we were a registered charity. And we took it because they were going to leave the shed and all the tools for us. So we thought those might come in handy if we didn't get any funding. But we were fortunate enough to then secure Climate Challenge funding. And we've been able to completely redevelop the garden. It's all been done, everything in the garden is organic, it's the permaculture processes. We have our amazing polycrub, which came from Shetland, who are also a social enterprise. We have a composting toilet, we have an outdoor kitchen, we have a huge number of volunteers who are engaged in it, and very, very active volunteers who have really kind of come in and taken ownership of the garden, which is how it should be. We just simply facilitate it. We also run workshops on food waste minimisation and budgeting and low carbon cooking, and that keys into our sharing shed. We now have, as I said, that 2 years funding from the lottery, but we're looking to make the garden more sustainable in the long term, which I'm going to come on to in a little bit. And we have our sharing shed. The aim of the sharing shed is to reduce food waste in the Thurso community. We've so far, since launching in the middle of COVID last year, saved over 20 tonnes of food from going to landfill. We've got a relationship with Seafine via FareShare, Tesco's, the Co-op, and with other local businesses to donate surplus food. It also helps to address food insecurity, but it gives a dignified approach. There's no referral process that's needed, and there's lots of people that use the shed. It's open to everybody. We also put in veggies from our garden. It's currently funded by the Co-op Local Food Fund and the Hubbub Community Fridge Network. As I mentioned, we're looking to make our community garden space sustainable, and the way that we do that is by having enterprising projects. So earlier on this year, we formed the Thurso Community Benefit Society, who are now our trading arm, and via Coastal Communities funding and Adapt and Thrive funding, we are developing retail premises in the centre of Thurso to be a zero waste refill shop. And we're also in the midst of a community asset transfer of extensive greenhouses in Thurso. Now, as you'll see from the photo, they don't look like they're in much shape at the moment, but we have that funding in place. And with what we were able to do with that community garden space, we absolutely know that we can turn these greenhouses around. Socially growing will grow and supply much more commercial growing. So not just vegetables for actual eating, but plug plants. We're looking to be able to scale that business up and to be able to supply places throughout Scotland with plug plant vegetables, as well as our local hotels, guest houses, B&Bs, restaurants, with all those kind of Mediterranean vegetables that you can't usually grow in a place like Thurso without having things under cover. The facilities will also be youth training facilities for young people, training them in enterprise, climate and land-based skills. There are significant issues in Thurso in terms of mental health and addiction, and a lot of young people who maybe are without hope. And we want to be able to take those young people, no matter what kind of trouble they've been in, no matter what kind of backgrounds they've had, and actually give them a chance and bring them on forwards. We'll also use the facilities for workshops and promoting circular economy. We're hoping to be able to put a tool library in somewhere in amongst all of these facilities, and also do workshops on repair and reuse, sewing, knitting, traditional crafts. We are also currently recruiting for a graduate for a project over 12 months to look at how we become net zero across Thurso. We feel that it should be in the community's hands and that the community should be involved in that process. And we want to look at to see how Thurso can become net zero from a community-led perspective. We know that we will need assistance from government, from local authority, from agencies, from other organisations, but this project will analyse what the current carbon emissions are in Thurso and look at how far we have to go and what we can do from a community-led perspective. We're really excited to get going on it, and we quietly have the ambition of becoming the first net zero town in Scotland. Lastly, we have been selected by the Scottish Government to run one of the first of 2 pilots across Scotland of regional climate action hubs. The other is in Aberdeen and the Shire, and Aberdeen Climate Action will be running it. We're calling ourselves the North Highlands and Islands Climate Hub, but the geographic representation within this pilot period is very loose. It may be better that the islands have their own hub, and also similarly, we would not turn away anybody who is in Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey from receiving assistance. The aim of the hubs is to promote community-led climate action and for us to be a support mechanism for communities to carry out their own climate action projects. I'm going to hand over now to Bethany, who's going to tell you a little bit more about it.
Hiya folks, my name is Bethany Laurie and I am a Development Officer at the North Highlands and Islands Climate Action Hub. So as Joan mentioned, we are currently in our pilot phase of the project that is for 6 months. So that will be up until spring next year. After that, we are funded for 3 years by the Scottish Government. So we're looking at empowering and supporting communities to carry out climate action projects. So that could be anything from food growing to new energy sources on a community building, all those kinds of things. So we're really hoping to share and signpost community groups to best practice, case studies, networks, organisations and agencies. So just to assist in any which way that we can to embed climate action into community groups and community projects. We'll be working with already existing networks and working closely with Highland Adapts as well. So I am one of 3 development officers. So there will be an Islands-based development officer and there is another development officer based throughout the Highlands. We do have a project manager as well as Joan, and we will have an admin and marketing person too. We will also be offering seed funding for projects and seed funding for community engagement as well. We do hope to be up and running, have our website up and running just before COP26.
If you'd like to get in contact with the Trust, you can do so in the details there. And we would really welcome and love to hear from any communities that are interested in community-led climate action projects across Highland and the Northern Isles. You can get in contact with us at inquiries@nhclimatehub.co.uk.
Thank you so much, Joan and Bethany. It is so inspirational to hear all the incredible work the Trust is currently doing. So to finish off the Resilient Communities session, we have a message from Emma Whittam, the Principal Project Manager for Highland Adapts. This is a project which I'm actively involved in, and I'm really excited for Emma to tell you more.
Hello, my name is Emma Whittam and I'm the project lead for Highland Adapts. I'm going to start with a wee chat about climate change adaptation and then introduce you all to the Highland Adapts initiative. Our climate in Highland is changing like the rest of the world, and over the last century temperatures have increased, sea levels have risen and rainfall patterns have changed with increased seasonality and more heavy downpours. The changes are projected to intensify over the coming decades. We can expect future changes in climate to be far greater than anything that we've seen in the past. And even if the world achieved net zero tomorrow, we'd still be locked into disruptive climate extremes and trends for decades. We must get used to increasing change. We must become more adaptive. Our changing climate brings both opportunities and risks. And taking early action to adapt will help increase resilience and reduce risks. There are many consequences that may occur from the impacts of climate change, and here are a few just to build up a picture. First, the productivity of agriculture and forestry. A warming climate has the potential to improve growing conditions in Scotland and increase the productivity of our agriculture and forestry. However, climate change also poses some threats, from more variable and extreme weather to the spread of pests and diseases, both which may limit this potential. Next, the security of our food supply. Climate change has and will have an impact on global food production. And although Scotland may be able to grow more food, this will not offset the impact global disruption has on us. The effects of increased volatility in the global commodity market due to the exposure of extreme climatic events has an impact on the supply and the cost of our food. Next, the availability and quality of our water. As our climate warms and rainfall patterns change, there may be increased competition for water between households, agriculture, industry, and the needs of the natural environment. Summer droughts may become more frequent and more severe, causing problems for the water quality and supply. And then, almost ironically, we also have the increased risk of flooding. Flooding can already have a devastating effect on those that are affected. With climate change likely to alter rainfall patterns and bring more heavy downpours, we expect flood risk to increase in the future. This could impact on our properties and infrastructure, with serious consequences for people, heritage, businesses, and communities. And then there's the change in our coast. Sea level rise is already having a widespread impact on parts of Highlands coast. With this set to accelerate over the coming decades, we can expect to see more coastal flooding, erosion, and coastline retreat, with consequences for our coastal communities and supporting infrastructure. And then also the impacts on our health and well-being of people. A warming climate may provide more opportunity to be outdoors and enjoy a healthy and more active lifestyle, whilst reducing winter mortality. However, it could affect patterns of disease and other health issues, and climate change and associated extreme weather may disrupt the lives of individuals and communities, limiting access to vital services and impacting on people's physical and mental health. Now, those are just a few examples to give you a little snapshot of the changes we can expect here in Highland over the coming decades. Now, I'm going to start sharing my screen and introduce you to Highland Adapts. Here we go. So it's imperative that we work together to get climate ready, ensuring that no one and nowhere is left behind. To facilitate this transformational action that is required, Highland Adapts has been formed. The purpose of Highland Adapts is to bring our communities, businesses, land managers and public sector together to facilitate transformational action towards a prosperous, climate-ready Highland. Highland Adapts has 10 guiding principles. The whole initiative is about transformational action. We must be brave and feel confidently hopeful that a climate-ready Highland is a flourishing, healthy place for all. And collaboration is going to be key. There are lots of brilliant initiatives and projects at work across the region, and Highland Adapts is committed to working with others, add value to what is already happening, and work with key players to achieve better, more holistic outcomes all round. The foundation of all our work will be both evidence-based and place-based. And all actions that come out of Highland Adapts will be sustainable and in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And our work links to all 17 of the goals. And this initiative is rooted in a deep understanding of the needs and the priorities of communities, with climate and social justice at the heart of all that we do. The objectives of Highland Adapts are to build up that evidence base, working with subject experts and our communities to develop detailed risk assessments and identify key actions that are then support our public, private and community sectors to invest, design and implement those priority climate action projects. Highland Adapts requires everyone to be involved. And this here is an image of what our partnership model looks like. Our structure is inclusive and is designed in a way to enable all voices to be heard, with strong lines of accountability, communication and support. This model is based on the value of shared power. This will mean some members will need to step into power, be a new space for them, whilst others will have to give up some power. It is the role of our core group to facilitate this and nurture members on this journey to create the meaningful transformation that is required. We have 8 founding partners: Highland Council, NHS Highland, Nature Scot, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Changeworks, Zero Waste Scotland, Forestry and Land Scotland, and Sniffer, who lead on the Adaptation Scotland programme. Each partner has committed to this initiative for the next 3 years, although we can all see that climate change adaptation is a long-term journey. These partners have been the core drivers that have got Highland Adapts to this stage. And now we're building up our team with representatives from across Highland, across various different sectors, and that we have got 2 key partners that are from Scottish Government funded initiatives, Climate Action Towns and the North Highlands and Islands Climate Hub. Both initiatives work seamlessly with Highland Adapts to ensure communities are engaged and supported. So to tell you a little bit about the Climate Hub, this is just in the process of being set up by the Thurso Development Trust and is one of 2 pilots in Scotland. Its purpose is to proactively carry out climate action projects which address climate change and create better, more resilient communities. Second initiative, Climate Action Towns. Allnice and Invergordon have been selected by Architecture and Design Scotland to be one of 6 climate action towns in Scotland. An ambition for the Climate Action Towns is that they embody collaborative partnership approaches adopted by the community, local authority, third sector and other stakeholders to deliver place-based approaches to climate change. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. We in Highland, we're in a really wonderful, unique position to have an adaptation partnership, a climate action town where we can be learning and getting support from Architecture and Design Scotland, and a climate hub pilot. And we must seize this wonderful opportunity and then showcase what can be done when people work together. And we really hope that we can inspire other regions across not just this country but across the world, and how we can drive forward this place-based collaborative approach to climate change adaptation. Partnership working built on solid relationships, a shared vision with endless hope, passion and commitment is the key to enabling and supporting the transformational action that is required to get Highland climate ready. We can do this if we work together. Thank you for listening.